My name is Riley and I am 30 years old. I slammed my front door pretending to leave for a therapy session. My husband insisted I desperately needed. But instead of driving away, I slipped silently into the dark garage and sat in my car. I pulled out my phone and turned on the baby monitor app, wanting to check on my son. I waited in the quiet shadows. Seconds later, the voices that came through the small speaker left me entirely frozen. My husband and my sister were not having an affair. They were actively collaborating on something much darker, a plot to dismantle my entire life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your reality twisted by the people who claim to love you most. I gripped the leather steering wheel of my SUV until my knuckles turned white. The heavy wooden door connecting the garage to the house was shut tight, but my heart was hammering so loudly I was afraid it would echo through the walls. I had just put on a tearful performance in the foyer, thanking my husband Carter for being so incredibly supportive of my mental health. Carter, at 33 years of age, was a real estate agent who projected the perfect image of a devoted family man. He had kissed my forehead, handed me my purse, and gently told me to take my time at the psychiatrist office. For the past 2 months, my life had felt like a waking nightmare. I was the founder and CEO of a highly successful UX/UI design agency. I built my company from the ground up, managing complex teams and securing massive tech contracts. But ever since my maternity leave began, after having our son Leo, my sharp mind seemed to be unraveling. I was constantly exhausted. I forgot where I put my car keys. I missed important conference calls because I could not remember my own login passwords. Carter was always right there, ready to catch me when I fell. He took over the household chores. He offered to temporarily manage my agency finances so I could rest. He booked the therapy appointments and softly whispered to my parents about severe postpartum depression. He played the role of the tragic, enduring husband so flawlessly that I actually felt guilty for burdening him. But my gut, the same instinct that helped me navigate the ruthless tech industry, was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. His solicitous behavior felt rehearsed. His sympathetic smiles never quite reached his eyes. That is why I faked my departure. I needed to see what happened in my house the moment I was supposedly out of the picture. Sitting in the suffocating silence of the garage, I opened the baby monitor app on my phone. I tapped the screen, expecting to hear the soft, rhythmic cooing of our son from his crib upstairs. I just wanted a moment of comfort, a reminder of why I was fighting so hard to get my mind right. The app connected. The audio feed crackled to life, but there were no baby sounds. Instead, I heard the distinct clink of ice dropping into a glass. Then Carter spoke, his tone completely devoid of the gentle, concerned whisper he used with me just 3 minutes earlier. "Are you sure she actually drove off?" Carter asked, his voice sharp and businesslike. I switched the camera view from the nursery to the living room. The high-definition lens captured our pristine living space, and my stomach plummeted. Carter was standing by the home bar, pouring a drink. Sitting on our custom velvet sofa, looking entirely too comfortable, was Savannah. Savannah was my younger sister. Growing up, she was the undisputed golden child of our family. While I was criticized for being too focused on my career, Savannah was praised for her social grace, her upcoming marriage to a wealthy heir, and her flawless appearance. Our parents, Thomas and Barbara, practically worshipped the ground she walked on, always reminding me that I should try to be more effortlessly perfect like her. Savannah and I barely tolerated each other, yet here she was in my house the moment I left. She watched from the window, I heard Savannah say through my phone speaker. "Her car is still in the driveway, but I saw her walk down the street toward the transit station. She probably forgot how to drive again." Savannah let out a cruel, sharp laugh. I sat paralyzed in the driver's seat. For a split second, the classic cliché washed over me. An affair. My husband was sleeping with my beautiful, favored younger sister. It was a terrible thought, but it was a familiar kind of terrible. I braced myself to see them kiss, to watch them embrace in my living room. But they did not move toward each other. There was no romantic tension in the room. There was only cold, calculated strategy. "We need to move faster," Carter said, pacing across the Persian rug. The psychiatrist is starting to ask too many questions about her daily routine. She is slipping, but she is not completely gone yet. Yesterday, she actually tried to log into her business accounts. I had to change the master passwords again and tell her she was just confused. Savannah picked up her glass and took a sip, crossing her legs. You are being too cautious, Carter. She needs to be completely incapacitated by the time the board meets next month. If she is still lucid enough to fight back, this whole thing falls apart. You said you could handle her. I am handling it, Carter snapped, running a hand through his hair. But her agency is practically printing money right now and her partners are getting suspicious. I need full power of attorney and I cannot get a judge to sign off on that. I slammed the front door loudly, announcing I was leaving for therapy. Instead, I slipped into my car inside the dark garage. I opened the baby monitor app on my phone, just wanting to hear my infant son. But seconds later, the voice that came through the speaker was not my baby. It was my husband, and what he said left me entirely frozen. My name is Riley, and at 30 years old, I thought I was losing my mind to postpartum depression. I was wrong. I was being methodically poisoned by the man I married. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your reality twisted by the people who claim to love you most. Unless she is legally declared incompetent, Savannah shot back through the monitor. Which is why you need to stop playing it safe, Carter. The dosage is not cutting it. Double it. Carter groaned. I cannot just dump pills into her mug. If I increase the neurosuppressants too fast, she might have a seizure or crash her car. If they run a toxicology screen at the hospital, I am going to federal prison. Then mix it better, my sister replied coldly. Use dark roast coffee. It masks the taste. You have been slipping it to her for 8 weeks, and all she does is act sleepy and forget passwords. We need a full break from reality. Hallucinations. Paranoia, the works. The psychiatrist needs to diagnose severe postpartum psychosis. That is the only way you get emergency custody of Leo and total control of her company. I stopped breathing. The air in my garage felt as thick as wet concrete. My hands began to shake violently. I was not losing my mind. I was being poisoned inside my very own home by my own family. For 2 agonizing months, I had genuinely believed I was failing as a mother and a professional. I had wept on my bathroom floor, terrified my brain was broken. The crippling fatigue that made lifting my own baby feel like moving a mountain. The terrifying moments of blanking out during crucial investor meetings. All of it was manufactured. Carter had been right there every single time, playing the saint. He brewed my coffee every morning at 6 o'clock sharp, bringing it to me in bed with a soft kiss. He suggested I stop nursing Leo and switch to formula, claiming it would help me sleep. He did not care about my sleep. He just needed to ensure the toxic chemicals did not end up in his son's system. My husband was methodically destroying my brain cells, and my own sister was coaching him on the dosage. I know the end game, Savannah, Carter said. Once the doctor signs the involuntary commitment papers, the state hands me the power of attorney by default. I get the house, the agency, and Leo. You get the seed money for your wedding and that boutique you want to open. I have not forgotten our deal. Then act like it, she demanded. Her agency just closed a massive contract. If you do not lock her away before the quarter ends, she is going to transfer those funds into a restricted trust for Leo. If she signs those documents, your window closes permanently. You will be stuck paying off your own messes while she realizes you are broke. My mind raced. The UX design agency I had built from a tiny shared workspace into a highly lucrative multi-million-dollar tech firm was the target. Carter had always resented my success. He hated that my income dwarfed his commissions as a real estate agent. He wanted my empire, but he did not want to work for it. He wanted to steal it and play the hero. I will up the dose tomorrow morning, Carter finally agreed. I will put it in her espresso. By the time she gets home, she will not be able to string a sentence together. We can call the crisis team by Friday. I sat in the dark, the cold reality settling into my bones. If I confronted them now, Carter would deny everything. He would call the police, point to my recent erratic behavior, and claim I was having a paranoid delusion. He had spent 8 weeks convincing everyone that I was dangerously unstable. No one would believe the hysterical woman screaming about poisoned coffee. I looked at the dashboard clock. I had exactly 24 hours before Carter planned to administer the final massive dose of neurosuppressants. 24 hours before they locked me away and stole my son forever. Panic flared in my chest, hot and suffocating, but I forced it down. Crying would not save me. Screaming would not save my baby. I needed to be entirely methodical. Carter and Savannah thought they were dealing with a weak, broken woman. They had severely underestimated me. I turned off the baby monitor app. I could not go to the therapy appointment. If the psychiatrist documented any more drug-induced confusion, it would only strengthen Carter's case against me. I needed undeniable medical proof of what was happening, and I needed it from a source Carter could not intercept. I started my car wincing at the noise, but the heavy garage door kept the sound muffled. I backed out quietly into the daylight. I did not drive toward the mental health clinic. Instead, I merged onto the highway, heading toward a private medical testing laboratory 2 towns over. I needed a comprehensive toxicology panel, and I needed it paid for in cash, completely off the grid. The poison in my veins was going to become my ultimate weapon against them. I gripped the wheel tightly, my vision clearing for the first time in weeks. They wanted to steal my life. I was going to let them try. But just as I merged onto the main road, the Bluetooth connection in my car engaged, amplifying the audio from the baby monitor app I had forgotten to force close. The connection had buffered, catching the last few moments in the living room. I pulled over onto the shoulder of the road, my tires crunching against the gravel. My hands trembled as I stared at the dashboard screen. A sharp, familiar ringtone echoed through the nursery monitor. Savannah was answering a FaceTime call on her tablet, and the volume was turned all the way up. "Is it done?" a voice asked. The breath was knocked completely out of my lungs. I knew that voice better than my own. It was Barbara. My mother. "Carter is being a coward, Mom," Savannah complained, her tone shifting into a whining drawl. "He is scared to increase the dosage. She is still fighting it." My own mother, the woman who had brushed my hair when I was a child, who had held my hand during labor, was on the other end of the line. I waited for her to scream, to ask what Savannah was talking about, to defend me. Instead, the cold, calculating response that came through the speaker shattered my world into a million jagged pieces. "Carter needs to listen to me," Barbara instructed. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, devoid of any maternal warmth. "Do not overdo it. Break her down slowly. If you give her a massive dose all at once, she will end up in the emergency room with a cardiac event. I do not want the police sniffing around our family. We need this to look like a tragic, organic mental collapse." "But her company partners are asking questions," Carter chimed in, leaning closer to Savannah's tablet. "Riley is holding on to the agency accounts tightly. Let her hold on for a few more days," my mother replied smoothly. "You need the psychiatric hold to be completely undisputed. Once she is committed involuntarily, the power of attorney kicks in automatically. Savannah will get the boutique capital, and Carter, you will get the agency and my grandson. But you must pace the breakdown properly. A sudden overdose is a crime scene. A slow deterioration is a tragedy. Stick to the plan." I sat in my idling car, entirely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. The audio cut out as the car drove out of range of my home network, leaving me in a deafening silence. The world outside my windshield blurred. My entire biological family was conspiring to strip me of my child, my mind, and my assets. It was not just Carter trying to steal my wealth. My mother was the architect of my destruction. She was actively instructing my husband on how to safely poison her own daughter, just to funnel my self-made money into Savannah's shallow ambitions. They wanted to take Leo away from me. They wanted to lock me in a psychiatric ward, stripped of my rights, labeled a crazy, unfit mother, while they spent the fortune I bled to build. A heavy, suffocating wave of despair threatened to pull me under. I wanted to scream until my vocal cords tore. I wanted to drive my car into a brick wall. The betrayal was so profound, so utterly evil, that my brain could barely process the reality of it. My mother did not love me. She saw me as an obstacle, a bank account waiting to be liquidated. I closed my eyes and gripped the steering wheel. I pictured Leo's tiny face. I pictured his bright green eyes and his soft, chubby hands reaching up for me. If I broke down now, they would win. If I let the panic consume me, Leo would be raised by monsters. I forced back the tears burning behind my eyes. I locked away the grief in a dark corner of my mind. The daughter who wanted her mother's love died right there on the side of the highway. In her place, a fierce, protective survivor took the wheel. I shifted my car into drive. I completely bypassed the highway exit for the psychiatric therapy clinic. Carter had booked that appointment specifically to build a paper trail of my supposed insanity. I was not going to give them a single piece of ammunition. I pulled out my phone and dialed the clinic, keeping my voice sounding groggy and confused. I told the receptionist I had gotten lost on the way and felt too overwhelmed to drive safely. I apologized profusely and rescheduled for the following week. It was the perfect excuse, playing exactly into Carter's narrative while buying me crucial time. As I drove further away from the city, the landscape shifted from manicured suburban lawns to sparse industrial parks. The rhythmic hum of the tires against the asphalt grounded me. I kept repeating the names of the people who had betrayed me. Carter, Savannah, Barbara, the holy trinity of my destruction. They had crafted a flawless narrative. Postpartum psychosis was the perfect cover. It explained the memory lapses, the exhaustion, the erratic behavior they were trying to induce. It was a condition that garnered public sympathy for the suffering husband while stripping the mother of all her credibility. Carter would play the tragic hero perfectly. He would wipe away fake tears in front of the judge, swearing he just wanted his wife to get the help she desperately needed. And my mother would stand right beside him, corroborating every lie, sacrificing her eldest daughter to fund her youngest daughter's lavish lifestyle. I drove 40 miles out of town, heading toward a private independent medical testing facility I had found on my phone. It was far away from our suburban neighborhood, far away from anyone Carter or my mother might know. I needed a discreet blood toxicology test, and I needed it processed immediately. I parked in the sterile, anonymous lot of the medical lab and walked inside. I paid in cash, ensuring the transaction would never appear on the joint bank statements Carter was currently monitoring. I used my maiden name and a burner email address I created in the parking lot. I requested a comprehensive heavy metals and illicit substance screen, specifically asking them to test for black market neurosuppressants and strong sedatives. The phlebotomist was a quiet older woman who did not ask any questions. As she tied the tourniquet around my arm and inserted the needle, I watched my dark red blood flow into the small glass vials. This was my proof. This was the undeniable scientific evidence that would save my life and protect my son. "We will email the encrypted results within 48 hours, the receptionist told me as I wrapped a bandage around my arm. You will need the PIN code provided on your receipt to unlock the document. I thanked her, folded the receipt carefully, and tucked it inside the lining of my phone case. I walked back out to my car, the afternoon sun beating down on the asphalt. The initial shock had entirely faded, replaced by a cold, calculating anger. My family wanted to play a psychological game of chess. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought I was a fragile, exhausted mother who would simply surrender her mind and her child without a fight. They were incredibly wrong. I had built a multi-million-dollar tech agency by outsmarting ruthless competitors and anticipating every hostile move. I knew how to strategize. I knew how to protect my assets. Now I just had to apply those exact same skills to my own survival. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I ruffled my hair, wiped away the sharp, focused look in my eyes, and practiced looking utterly defeated. I had to go back to that house. I had to smile at the man who was poisoning me. I had to endure the presence of the family plotting my demise. I had to go back into the lion's den and pretend I did not know they were lions. The ultimate performance of my life was about to begin. I pulled into the driveway, staring at the pristine facade of our suburban home. I sat in the driver's seat for one final moment of absolute clarity. I locked my spine, dropped my shoulders, and let the practiced mask of exhaustion wash over my face. I rubbed my eyes until they were red, messed up my hair just enough to look unhinged, and walked through the front door. Carter was waiting in the kitchen, bouncing Leo on his hip. He looked like the cover of a parenting magazine. The sight of his hands cradling my innocent son made my stomach violently revolt, but I forced a weak, trembling smile. "How was the appointment, honey?" Carter asked, his voice dripping with manufactured concern. I let my purse slide carelessly off my shoulder, letting it hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud. "It was okay," I mumbled, rubbing my temples. "I had trouble focusing. I feel so incredibly tired, Carter. My brain feels like it is packed with cotton." Carter walked over, kissing the top of my head while adjusting Leo. "You are just doing too much, Riley. You need to let go and let me take care of you. Sit down. I made your favorite dark roast. You need a pick-me-up." Dark roast. Exactly as Savannah had instructed him over the baby monitor. It masked the bitter taste of the neurosuppressants. I nodded submissively and sank into a velvet dining chair. While his back was turned to the espresso machine, I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket. During my drive back from the private lab, I had emptied out a small travel-sized perfume atomizer. I unscrewed the cap and slid the empty glass vial into the loose sleeve of my cardigan, securing it with the tight cuff around my wrist. Carter turned around, holding a steaming ceramic mug. He placed it gently on the table in front of me. "Drink up," he said, taking the seat across from me. He watched me with intense, unblinking eyes. He was waiting for the show. He was waiting to watch his wife swallow poison. I picked up the mug. The heat radiated against my palms. I brought it to my lips, letting the dark liquid touch the very edge of my mouth, pretending to take a long, desperate sip. I closed my eyes, acting as though the warmth was soothing my shattered nerves. When I lowered the mug, I covertly tilted my wrist. In one seamless, practiced motion, I let a stream of the hot coffee pour down the outside of the mug and straight into the hidden glass vial tucked inside my sleeve. The thick fabric absorbed any stray drops. "Thank you," I whispered, setting the mug down. "It tastes a little bitter today." Carter's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before his sympathetic smile returned. "I tried a new brand. I thought a stronger blend might help clear your head. Drink the rest, Riley. You really need the energy." Over the next 10 minutes, I engaged in a high-stakes performance. I faked 3 more sips, each time successfully transferring a portion of the poisoned coffee into the vial hidden up my sleeve, until the mug was nearly empty. I made sure to leave just enough at the bottom to look natural. The liquid burned warmly against my wrist through the glass, a constant physical reminder of his lethal intentions. Now I needed to feed his ego. I needed to convince him that his accelerated dosage was working immediately, so he would not suspect a thing. I stood up from the table, swaying just slightly to mimic the severe dizziness I had experienced over the last few weeks when I was actually ingesting the chemicals. "I should put my keys away," I muttered, wandering aimlessly toward the kitchen counter. Instead of placing them in the decorative bowl by the door, I opened the refrigerator and dropped my car keys right next to the milk carton. I closed the door and turned back to him, wearing a look of complete vacancy. Carter did not say a word, but I saw the triumphant gleam flash across his eyes. He reveled in my fabricated deterioration. I walked over to the kitchen island, picked up my phone, and purposefully slipped it inside the pantry, behind a box of cereal. "Carter, have you seen my phone?" I asked, my voice rising in manufactured panic. "I just had it. I know I just had it." Carter set Leo down in his playpen and walked over to me, placing his hands firmly on my shoulders. "Riley, calm down. You are spiraling again. You walked in without your phone, remember? You probably left it in the car." "No," I cried, letting genuine tears of anger masquerade as tears of confusion. "No, I brought it inside. I know I did. Why is my memory doing this? Am I going crazy?" Carter pulled me into a tight embrace. Being pressed against his chest took every ounce of willpower I possessed. My skin crawled. "You are not crazy, sweetheart," he murmured into my hair, playing the role of the devoted savior to absolute perfection. "You are just dealing with severe postpartum issues." But I am here. I am going to handle everything. I will handle Leo. I will handle the company. You just need to surrender control. The psychological cat and mouse game had officially begun. I buried my face in his shoulder and nodded, pretending to surrender. I had to endure living with my would-be destroyer. Every single interaction became a calculated test. I watched him closely when he thought I was not looking. I noticed how he hovered near my drinks, how he subtly isolated me from my neighbors. I was living with a predator, sharing his bed, eating at his table, and pretending to be his prey. Every second spent in that house required a monumental act of compartmentalization. When Leo cried, I had to suppress the urge to snatch him up and run out the front door. I had to let Carter play the attentive father, watching him rock our baby, while secretly knowing he was plotting to strip me of my maternal rights. The absolute cruelty was staggering. Later that evening, while Carter was busy in his home office, supposedly managing our household bills, I quietly retrieved my keys from the refrigerator and my phone from the pantry, placing them exactly where they belonged. I wanted to keep him off balance, making him question if he had imagined the severity of my episode. I took the glass vial from my sleeve, sealed it tightly, and hid it securely inside the false bottom of my jewelry box. That small tube of dark brown liquid was the first tangible piece of evidence in my counteroffensive. I was a prisoner in my own home, trapped in a deadly illusion, but I was no longer the victim. I was a prisoner in my own home, trapped in a deadly illusion, but I was no longer the victim. 2 days later, that newfound resolve faced its most grueling test. It was Sunday evening, the night of our traditional family dinner. Before the doorbell even announced their arrival, I stood in the downstairs bathroom staring at my reflection. I hit the record button on my voice memo app, locked the screen, and slid the phone deep into the pocket of my wool cardigan. It was fully charged and possessed ample storage. Every sickening lie, every rehearsed piece of gaslighting would be captured. I took a deep breath, smoothing my features into a mask of fragile exhaustion, and walked out just as Carter opened the front door. My parents, Thomas and Barbara, swept into the foyer, bringing a gust of crisp autumn air with them. Savannah trailed right behind, holding a bottle of expensive red wine and wearing a practiced look of concern. The sheer audacity of their performance was nauseating. My mother rushed forward, wrapping her arms around me in a tight, suffocating hug. She smelled of heavy floral perfume and deceit. She stroked my hair, murmuring sweet, empty reassurances about how tired I looked and how they were here to help. Thomas clapped Carter on the shoulder, giving him a firm, masculine nod of solidarity. It was the universal gesture of men silently agreeing on the burden of a hysterical woman. Savannah bypassed me entirely, heading straight for Leo, in his playpen, cooing at my son, with the very same mouth she had used to casually suggest doubling my poison. I forced my hands to remain loosely at my sides. I could not afford to clench my fists. I had to play the part. The psychological assault commenced before we even reached the dining table. I had just laid Leo down in his bassinet in the adjoining family room for a brief nap, carefully tucking his favorite plush yellow blanket around his legs. It was a sensory item he absolutely needed to settle down. I walked into the kitchen to check on the roast Carter was carving. Barely 5 minutes passed before a sharp wail erupted from the bassinet. I hurried back into the family room. Savannah was standing unusually close to the crib. The yellow blanket was gone. I frantically patted down the cushions, checking the floor around the bassinet. "He just had it," I whispered, keeping my voice intentionally breathy and panicked. "I just put it right here." Savannah sighed, crossing her arms. "Riley, the blanket is not here. You probably left it upstairs and just imagined bringing it down. You know how your mind has been playing tricks on you lately." Barbara glided into the room, her brow furrowed in deep theatrical worry. "Sweetheart, do not upset the baby by frantically searching for something you clearly misplaced. Just give him another blanket." I knew exactly what they were doing. I knew Savannah had snatched it the moment my back was turned. But I let my shoulders slump. I let my breathing hitch. "I apologize," I stammered, pulling a different blanket from the diaper bag while Leo continued to fuss. "I swear I brought it down. My memory is just so foggy. Carter materialized in the doorway, exchanging a swift, triumphant glance with my mother. "It is okay, honey," he said smoothly. "We are all here to support you. Let us just sit down and eat." The dining room felt like a tribunal. I sat at one end of the long mahogany table surrounded by my executioners. They passed plates of roasted vegetables and carved meat, chatting amiably about Thomas and his golf game and Savannah and her upcoming wedding plans. They deliberately excluded me from the main flow of conversation, treating me like a fragile patient who could not handle complex topics. I picked at my food, keeping my head bowed, letting the hidden phone in my pocket capture the crisp, high-quality audio of their casual cruelty. Then the second phase of their coordinated attack launched. Carter reached into his pocket and frowned. "Riley, did you move my spare set of car keys? I left them on the kitchen island this morning." I looked up, my eyes wide. "No, I did not touch them." Savannah let out a loud, dramatic sigh. "Are you sure, Riley? You know you have been moving things around the house and completely forgetting about it. Last week you put the television remote in the dishwasher." That was Carter doing, of course, but I swallowed hard. "I did not move the keys," I repeated, injecting a waver into my voice. Thomas slammed his palm flat against the table. The sudden noise made me jump. "Do not argue with your husband, Riley." My father barked, his voice booming with patriarchal authority. "Carter is doing everything he can to hold this household together while you are falling apart. If he says he left the keys on the island, he left them on the island. Empty your pockets." The demand was humiliating. It was designed to reduce me to the status of a disobedient child. I slowly stood up from my chair. I reached into the shallow front pockets of my jeans. My fingers brushed against cold metal. My heart stopped. I pulled my hand out. Resting in my palm was Carter and his spare set of keys. Someone, likely my mother during her suffocating arrival hug, had slipped them into my pocket. A heavy, accusatory silence descended upon the dining room. I stared at the keys in my hand, forcing a look of absolute horror onto my face. I gasped, letting the keys clatter loudly onto the table. "I do not know how they got there," I cried out, my voice trembling violently. "I swear I did not put them there." Barbara covered her mouth with her hands, shaking her head in exaggerated disbelief. "Oh, Riley, this is getting worse. You are completely untethered from reality. You are hiding things on your own person and lying about it." I sank back into my chair, burying my face in my hands. The rough denim of my sleeves pressed against my eyes. Beneath the table, I bit down on the inside of my cheek. I bit down so hard that the metallic tang of copper flooded my mouth. The physical pain grounded me, preventing my searing rage from breaking my fragile facade. I let out a wretched, broken sob, tasting my own blood. "This is exactly what I was talking about," Thomas announced, his voice dripping with grave disappointment. He addressed Carter directly, as if I were not even in the room. "She is a danger to herself, Carter. And more importantly, she is becoming a physical danger to my grandson. If she is wandering around hiding things, forgetting her actions entirely, what happens when she forgets she left the stove on? What happens when she forgets she left Leo in the bathtub?" The accusation was a strategic masterstroke. They were establishing a verbal record, an anecdotal history of my supposed threat level to my own child. They were laying the precise groundwork for the involuntary psychiatric hold and the emergency custody petition. Carter reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His skin felt like ice. "We will figure this out, Thomas," Carter said, playing his role flawlessly. "I will not let anything happen to Leo. I am looking into inpatient facilities. We just need to get her through this weekend safely." Savannah leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malice. "You need to do it soon, Carter, for everyone's sake. She is completely unstable." I kept my face hidden in my trembling hands, letting them hear my muffled, defeated weeping. I let them think they had utterly broken me. I let them relish their victory. I let Thomas pontificate about my mental decline. I let Barbara sigh with fake tragedy. I let Savannah make her snide remarks. I absorbed every single vile word. Down in the dark wool pocket of my cardigan, the red light of my phone continued to blink steadily. It was capturing the irrefutable digital evidence of their conspiracy. The taste of blood in my mouth was sharp, but the promise of their impending destruction was so much sweeter. The trap was set, and they had just gleefully walked right into it. The heavy oak front door finally clicked shut behind my parents and sister, plunging the house into a stifling, oppressive quiet. Carter exhaled a long, dramatic breath, rubbing the back of his neck as he turned to face me in the foyer. He played the exhausted, dutiful husband flawlessly. "I am going to go check on Leo," he murmured, his voice laced with manufactured pity. "Why do you not just go upstairs and rest, Riley? You have had a very long night." I did not argue. I simply nodded, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the floorboards, and slowly dragged myself up the staircase, leaning heavily against the banister. Once inside our master bedroom, I locked the door and pulled the phone from my cardigan pocket. My hands were shaking, but my mind was razor sharp. I stopped the recording immediately, renaming the file to an innocuous string of numbers, and uploaded it to 3 separate encrypted cloud servers that Carter did not know existed. I listened to the first few seconds to verify the audio quality. The playback was crystal clear. Savannah and her sneering insults, my father and his booming accusations, my mother and her treacherous sighs. It was a perfect symphony of their guilt. I deleted the local file from my device, cleared the cache, and slid the phone onto the nightstand. The next morning brought a fresh wave of adrenaline. Carter had an early meeting with his real estate brokerage, leaving me alone in the house with Leo. The moment Carter pulled his car out of the driveway, my phone vibrated with a secure email notification. The sender was the private out-of-town medical laboratory. My breath caught in my throat. I carried Leo into the kitchen, settling him into his high chair with a handful of cereal puffs, and opened the email. The screen prompted me for the personalized PIN code printed on my physical receipt. I typed the numbers in my heart, hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The encrypted PDF document loaded instantly. I scanned past the standard metabolic panels and vitamin levels, my eyes landing directly on the toxicology screening section. There, highlighted in stark, alarming red ink, was the undeniable truth. The report detailed dangerously high toxic levels of a synthetic central nervous system depressant. It was a black market tranquilizer, a heavy sedative typically used in veterinary medicine or illicitly to induce severe lethargy, memory loss, and cognitive dysfunction. The notes section from the pathologist indicated that the concentration in my bloodstream was chronic and cumulative, meaning it had been administered consistently over a prolonged period. A separate flag highlighted a dangerous interaction warning, stating that a sudden increase in this specific neurosuppressant could trigger respiratory failure or a fatal cardiac event. This was not postpartum depression. This was not a mental breakdown. This was a slow, methodical chemical assault. Carter was not just trying to steal my company. He was playing Russian roulette with my life, relying on a black market substance to scramble my brain, while Savannah and my mother orchestrated the optics. I stared at the screen, the clinical black and white text validating every single suspicion I harbored. I was completely sane. I was just being poisoned. I saved the PDF to my secure servers, taking screenshots and burying them deep within a hidden folder on my phone. The medical proof was undeniable, but I could not go to the police yet. If I called the authorities right now, Carter would simply claim I had bought the drugs myself in a psychotic haze. He had spent 8 weeks telling everyone I was unstable. I needed more. I needed to trap him entirely. I needed to act normal. We were out of baby formula, the specific hypoallergenic brand Leo required. It was the perfect mundane excuse to leave the house and clear my head. I strapped Leo into his car seat and drove to the upscale grocery store a few miles from our neighborhood. The crisp morning air felt invigorating, a sharp contrast to the toxic atmosphere of my home. I walked through the brightly lit aisles, placing 2 large canisters of formula into the shopping cart, along with a few organic purees. I reached the checkout lane, bouncing a fussy Leo on my hip, while the cashier scanned the items. "That will be $84.50, the teenager behind the register announced cheerfully. I pulled my premium platinum credit card from my wallet. It was linked directly to my personal checking account, the one where I kept my independent savings. I tapped the card against the terminal. The machine let out a harsh, flat beep. Card declined. The cashier said, her smile faltering slightly. Sometimes the chip reader is finicky. Do you want to try inserting it? I frowned, a sudden knot of unease tightening in my stomach. I had over $50,000 in liquid cash in that specific account. I inserted the chip. The screen flashed red. Declined. Please contact issuer. That is impossible, I muttered, feeling the prickle of heat rising in my cheeks as the customer behind me shifted impatiently. I pulled out my secondary card, a corporate expense card tied to my UX design agency. I swiped it. Declined. Panic, cold and sharp, began to spread through my veins. I am so sorry, let me just check my bank app. I told the cashier, stepping slightly to the side so the next person could pay. I pulled up my banking application, waiting for the familiar interface to load. Instead of my account balances, a bold error message blocked the screen. Account access suspended. Please contact customer service. I abandoned the groceries, apologizing hastily to the confused teenager, and practically sprinted out to my car. I locked the doors, strapped Leo back in, and dialed the elite customer service hotline for my bank. After verifying my identity with my social security number and security questions, I demanded to know what was happening. Mrs. Blackwood, the representative, began, her tone shifting into a carefully scripted, delicate cadence. Your accounts have been temporarily frozen. A freeze was initiated late last night by your husband, Carter Blackwood. He is an authorized user, but these are my primary accounts. I snapped, fighting to keep my voice from shaking. He does not have the authority to freeze my business assets. Ma'am, he utilized the emergency spousal privilege clause, the representative explained softly. He provided documentation from your family physician regarding a severe ongoing mental health crisis. He cited erratic financial behavior and extreme cognitive decline, requesting an emergency freeze to protect the marital assets and prevent you from self-harming financially while you seek psychiatric treatment. I stopped breathing. The air in the car turned to ice. Carter had not just poisoned me, he had weaponized the very illness he was inducing. By using the medical breadcrumbs he had carefully laid out over the past 2 months, he had successfully convinced my bank that I was experiencing a full-blown psychotic break. He had effectively cut me off from every single dollar I had ever earned. I had no access to my savings, no access to my corporate funds, no access to the very wealth they were trying to steal. I hung up the phone and stared out the windshield. I was chemically assaulted. I was emotionally isolated by my own blood relatives. And now, I was entirely, completely broke. Carter had trapped me in a cage of my own making, using my own money to build the bars. The game had just escalated to a terrifying new level, and I had zero financial resources left to fight back. I sat in that grocery store parking lot staring at the declined credit card in my hand until the plastic edges bit into my skin. I had zero financial resources left to fight back. But as the initial shock subsided, a cold, hard logic took its place in my mind. If Carter controlled my money, I needed someone who understood money better than he did. I needed someone who could navigate financial lockouts, trace hidden assets, and outsmart a fraudulent power of attorney. I needed an outsider. The annual summer barbecue at Carter's older sister's house was scheduled for the following afternoon. Monica was sweet, if a bit naive to her brother's true nature, but her husband Deshaun was a different story entirely. At 34, Deshaun was a senior forensic accountant for a massive corporate auditing firm. He was sharp, intensely pragmatic, and strictly principled. He had also never bothered to hide his fundamental disdain for my husband. Deshaun saw Carter exactly for what he was, a flashy, substanceless hustler who cared more about leased sports cars and fake Rolexes than actual hard work. Deshaun was the only person in Carter's orbit who possessed the specific financial expertise I desperately needed, and more importantly, he was the only one who would not automatically take Carter's side. The next day, Carter drove us to Monica and Deshaun's sprawling suburban home. He played his role perfectly, the entire car ride, adjusting the air conditioning for me, asking if the radio volume was too loud for my supposed headaches, and making sure Leo was perfectly situated in his car seat. I kept my gaze out the window, nodding passively, playing the medicated docile wife to perfection. We walked into the backyard, which was already buzzing with Monica's friends and extended family. The smell of hickory smoke and grilled meat filled the warm afternoon air. Deshawn stood by the massive stainless steel grill, expertly flipping burgers with a pair of silver tongs. He wore a crisp polo shirt and a serious expression, listening to one of Carter's cousins brag about a cryptocurrency tip. When Deshawn saw us arrive, his eyes flicked over Carter with a brief, thinly veiled look of exhaustion before landing on me. He offered a polite, genuine nod. I returned it, my mind racing. I needed him alone. The immediate problem was that Carter was glued to my side. He hovered like a prison guard disguised as a doting spouse. Every time I moved toward the food table, he was there offering to fix my plate. Every time I stepped toward the shade of the patio umbrella, he guided me by the elbow, telling anyone who would listen that I had been feeling under the weather and needed to rest. He was isolating me in plain sight, making sure I could not string together a coherent conversation with anyone, cementing the narrative of my mental decline to a fresh audience. I waited an hour. I let the afternoon heat build. I sat quietly in a lawn chair, bouncing Leo on my lap, until Monica announced that the buffet was ready. People began migrating toward the long folding tables set up on the wooden deck. Carter was momentarily distracted by a conversation with Monica about their mother's upcoming birthday. This was my window. I stood up, handing Leo to a very surprised Monica, citing a sudden need for water. I walked over to the beverage station, where a large, heavy tray held 24 plastic cups filled to the brim with sweet tea and ice. I gripped the handles of the tray firmly. Carter noticed me moving and immediately excused himself from his sister, striding toward me with that fake, concerned smile plastered across his face. "Riley, let me get that you are too weak," he called out loudly, making sure the patio audience heard him. I did not stop. I turned toward the kitchen door, waiting until Carter was exactly 3 steps away. Then I deliberately let my left wrist give out. The heavy tray pitched sideways. 24 cups of iced sweet tea crashed onto the wooden deck, shattering plastic and sending a tidal wave of sticky brown liquid and ice cubes cascading across the floorboards. The deluge splashed directly onto Carter's expensive, pale suede loafers. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. I immediately brought my hands to my mouth, letting out a sharp, dramatic cry of dismay. "I am so sorry," I wailed, shrinking back as if terrified of my own clumsiness. My hands just gave out. "I am so sorry." Carter's jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. He stared at his ruined shoes, a flash of pure, unadulterated rage breaking through his perfect mask. But he quickly recovered, remembering his audience. "It is fine, sweetheart," he gritted out, forcing a tight smile that did not reach his eyes. "You are just unwell. Let me clean this up." Monica rushed over with a handful of napkins, apologizing for the mess. "I need real towels from the kitchen," I sobbed, playing the hysterical, embarrassed wife to the hilt. "I will get them." Before Carter could stop me, I spun around and bolted through the sliding glass doors into the cool, air-conditioned kitchen. Deshawn was already inside, pulling a fresh stack of thick paper towels from the walk-in pantry. He looked up as I burst through the doors, my face flushed, my breathing heavy. He started to hand me the roll, a sympathetic look on his face. "You do not need to cry over spilled tea, Riley. Carter can handle it." I grabbed the paper towels, tossing them onto the granite island. The tears vanished from my eyes instantly. My posture straightened. The trembling in my hands ceased completely. I stepped close to Deshawn, dropping my voice to a sharp, urgent whisper. "I am not crying over tea, Deshawn. I did that on purpose to get away from him. I have exactly 60 seconds before he follows me in here, and you are the only person who can help me." Deshawn froze. The forensic accountant in him immediately registered the drastic shift in my demeanor. The fragile, confused woman from the patio was entirely gone. He narrowed his eyes, his sharp intellect assessing the situation. "Help you with what?" "He is poisoning me." I stated the words cold and precise. "He has been slipping black market neurosuppressants into my coffee for 2 months to manufacture a psychotic break. My mother and sister are helping him. I got a private toxicology screening yesterday that proves it. But this morning he used my fake medical records to invoke spousal privilege and completely freeze my personal and business bank accounts. I cannot access a single dime of my own money. Deshaun stared at me, his face an unreadable mask. It was a massive, insane accusation. But Deshaun dealt in facts and hidden numbers in catching corporate liars who thought they were smarter than everyone else. He looked toward the sliding glass door where Carter was aggressively scrubbing the deck, his face flushed with irritation. Carter does not have the assets to float a prolonged legal battle, Deshaun said slowly, his analytical mind already turning the gears. He is leveraged to the hilt on his car and his wardrobe. Exactly, I whispered, pulling my phone from my pocket and unlocking the secure folder. He wants my agency. He wants involuntary commitment, so he gets power of attorney. Here is the talk screen. I shoved the phone into Deshaun's hand just as the sliding glass door rattled on its tracks. Deshaun glanced at the screen, his eyes widening marginally as he processed the red highlighted chemicals on the medical report. The handle on the door turned. Carter was coming inside. Deshaun smoothly slipped my phone into his own pocket and grabbed a dry dish towel, turning toward the sink just as my husband stepped into the kitchen. Carter's heavy footsteps echoed against the polished tile floor as he stepped into the kitchen. He was breathing hard, a tight artificial smile stretched across his face. I immediately slumped forward against the cool granite of the kitchen island. I buried my face in the thick stack of paper towels Deshaun had just set down, my shoulders heaving with loud, exaggerated sobs. "I am so sorry, man," Carter said, his voice dripping with that fake, long-suffering husband tone. "She is just really struggling today. The baby kept her up all night and her nerves are completely shot." Deshaun did not miss a single beat. He leaned back against the counter, crossing his muscular arms, looking entirely unbothered by the dramatic display. "It is just iced tea, Carter. Do not sweat it. But hey, before you take her home, I actually need a massive favor." Carter blinked, his focus shifting away from my weeping form. "A favor?" "Yeah," Deshaun said, pointing a thumb toward the sliding glass door. "The valve on my backup propane tank is totally jammed. My hands are covered in grease from the burgers and I cannot get a grip on it. I need you to come crank it open for me before this fire dies out and ruins the food." Carter hesitated, glancing down at me with feigned concern. I really should get Riley seated. "She is fine right here," Deshaun insisted, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "It will take you 10 seconds. Give the woman a minute to breathe in the air conditioning." Carter's jaw twitched. He hated being ordered around, but he could not risk breaking his perfect guy persona in front of his brother-in-law. "Right. Okay. 10 seconds." The moment the sliding glass door clicked shut behind Carter, I pushed myself off the granite counter. The weeping ceased instantly. I stood up perfectly straight, wiping the few stray manufactured tears from my cheeks. The fragile, broken woman vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, calculating professional fighting for her life. Deshaun stared at me, his dark eyes sharp and assessing. He pulled my phone from his pocket where he had stashed it moments ago, but he did not hand it back. Instead, he watched me with intense, unwavering focus. I reached into the small coin pocket of my jeans and pulled out a tiny silver USB flash drive. I stepped forward and pressed it firmly into his large palm. "I do not have much time," I said, my voice dead serious and completely steady. "That drive contains everything. It has the raw, encrypted PDF of the toxicology report I just showed you. It has a high-definition audio file captured from my baby monitor, proving my mother and sister are actively coaching Carter on the poison dosages. And it has a hidden text file containing the master routing numbers, back-end server credentials, and dual authentication bypass codes for my LLC corporate accounts." Deshaun looked down at the small metal drive in his hand. The gravity of the situation was settling heavily over him. As a forensic accountant, he spent his life tracing hidden corporate theft, uncovering white-collar embezzlement, and dismantling complex financial fraud. He was looking at the ultimate digital smoking gun. He froze my accounts this morning using a fabricated mental health crisis as leverage. I continued, speaking rapidly but clearly. "He is trying to push me into an involuntary psychiatric commitment. If he succeeds, he gains automatic medical and financial power of attorney by default. He gets my son. He gets my multi-million-dollar agency. He gets the house. I need you to quietly audit his finances, Deshaun. I need to know exactly how much debt he is hiding and who he owes money to. There is a specific financial reason they are accelerating this timeline right now. And more importantly, I need you to build a digital firewall around my company backend. Deshaun tapped the screen of my phone, which he was still holding. He pulled a wireless earbud from his polo shirt pocket, placed it in his ear, and synced it to my device. "Show me the audio," he demanded softly. I reached over, navigating to the hidden folder, and pressed play on the recording of Savannah and my mother discussing my organic mental collapse. I watched Deshaun's face closely as he listened. For a few seconds, he was completely stoic. Then a muscle in his jaw began to jump frantically. His eyes widened slightly as my mother's cold, calculated instructions filled his ear, detailing how to slowly deteriorate my organs without triggering a fatal cardiac event. The sheer malice of the recording was undeniable. This was not a messy divorce. This was attempted murder orchestrated by my own blood relatives. Deshaun pulled the earbud out, his expression darkening into something deeply dangerous. The professional skepticism evaporated entirely, replaced by a fierce protective outrage. He slipped the USB drive into his pocket and handed my phone back to me. "They are going to kill you, Riley," he stated, his voice low and vibrating with absolute certainty. "If he makes a single mistake with those heavy sedatives, your heart stops. This is immediate lethal danger." "I know," I replied, my voice a harsh whisper. "But if I go to the cops right now with frozen accounts and a manufactured medical record saying I am insane, Carter will spin it. He will say I bought the drugs myself in a psychotic haze. He will bury me in litigation I cannot afford to fight. I need financial control, and I need an ironclad paper trail of his fraud to destroy their entire narrative." Deshaun nodded, his professional instincts kicking into massive overdrive. He was no longer just my brother-in-law. He was my shadow operative. "Consider your company backend locked down completely. I will set up a ghost proxy server tonight. Even if he somehow gets a judge to grant him power of attorney, any attempt to move your corporate funds will trigger a silent reroute into an offshore blind trust he cannot touch. Then I am going to rip into his financial history. I will find every hidden credit card, every bad investment, every single motive he has for needing your cash." "Thank you," I whispered, the first wave of genuine relief washing over me in weeks. "Do not thank me yet," Deshaun warned, his eyes intensely serious. "You have to go back to that house with a man actively trying to end your life. You have to drink what he gives you, or at least pretend to. You have to play the crazy submissive wife until I can build an airtight financial cage around him." "Can you do that?" "I have been doing it for 2 months," I said fiercely. "I can hold on. I will communicate with you through the encrypted messaging app I use for corporate whistleblowers," he instructed rapidly. "I will drop a secure link to your burner email address tonight. Use it exclusively." Through the kitchen window, I saw Carter turning away from the grill, wiping his hands aggressively on a paper towel. He was heading back toward the house. "He is coming," Deshaun muttered. I immediately grabbed the stack of paper towels, burying my face in them once more. I let my shoulders drop, curling my spine inward to make myself look as small and broken as possible. I forced a ragged, trembling breath into my lungs, summoning tears to my eyes, just as the glass door slid open. "All right, the tank is open," Carter announced, stepping back into the cool kitchen air. His eyes immediately locked onto me, assessing my posture like a warden checking on a prisoner. "Are you feeling any better, sweetheart?" Deshaun tossed the dirty dish towel into the sink, looking perfectly annoyed by the disruption. "She is still pretty shaken up, Carter. You better take her home and let her sleep this off." Carter walked over, wrapping a heavy, possessive arm around my waist. "You are right. Let us get you home, Riley." I leaned into his chest, playing the exhausted, deteriorating victim. But inside my pocket, my fingers brushed against the cool metal of my phone. I had an ally. The counterattack had officially begun. The drive back to our neighborhood was suffocatingly quiet. Carter kept the car radio off and the air conditioning blasting, occasionally reaching across the center console to pat my knee with a sickening display of feigned devotion. I kept my eyes closed, leaning my head heavily against the cold glass of the passenger window, visualizing the impenetrable digital firewall Deshawn was currently constructing around my company. The moment we pulled into our driveway, my phone vibrated once in my pocket. It was a blank anonymous text message containing only a randomized URL string. Deshawn had delivered the secure communication link exactly as promised. I swiped the notification away before Carter cut the engine, maintaining my docile facade. We walked inside, the heavy silence of the house pressing down on my chest. I headed straight for the living room to relieve the teenage babysitter we had hired for the afternoon, desperate to hold my son and ground myself in the only reality that mattered. I had barely paid the girl and settled into the rocking chair with Leo when the front doorbell chimed. The sharp sound echoed through the quiet hallway, sending an immediate visceral spike of dread straight down my spine. We were not expecting anyone. I held Leo tighter to my chest, listening as Carter's heavy footsteps moved rapidly toward the foyer. The low murmur of voices drifted up the stairs, followed almost instantly by the unmistakable high-pitched laugh of my sister. Savannah had arrived. I froze in the rocking chair, my muscles locking up defensively. Savannah never dropped by unannounced. Every single interaction with her was a calculated move, a specific piece of the elaborate stage play she and my mother were directing. I stood up, adjusting Leo on my hip, and walked out to the landing just as Carter led her up the stairs. She was wearing a pristine white sundress, carrying a large designer tote bag, and wearing an expression of intense, exaggerated concern that made my stomach physically churn. "Riley, you poor thing," Savannah cooed, rushing up the final few steps and reaching out to stroke my arm. "Carter just texted me about the incident at the barbecue. He told me you were having another one of your dizzy spells and dropped an entire tray of drinks. I came over the second I heard. You look absolutely exhausted, honey. You are practically pale as a ghost." I forced myself not to recoil from her touch. Her perfume was overwhelming, a sharp floral scent that completely masked the underlying rot of her intentions. "I am fine, Savannah," I managed to say, keeping my voice soft, airy, and appropriately weak. "It was just a little slip. I just need to get Leo down for his afternoon nap." Carter stepped up beside her, placing a firm, unyielding hand on my shoulder. His grip was tight enough to leave a bruise. "No, Riley," he said, his tone adopting that smooth, authoritative cadence he used whenever he was building his case against me. "You are not fine. You have been running yourself ragged and your coordination is clearly failing. It is not safe for you to be carrying the baby up and down the stairs when your hands are giving out. Savannah is here to help out her sick sister. She's going to take Leo for the afternoon so you can get some actual uninterrupted rest." The air completely evaporated from my lungs. The hardwood floor seemed to tilt violently beneath my feet. "Hand my son over to the woman who had coldly suggested doubling my dosage of central nervous system depressants. Let her walk out the front door with the most precious thing in my world." Every maternal instinct in my body screamed at me to turn and run, to lock myself in the nursery and barricade the heavy wooden door. I could feel the adrenaline flooding my system, urging me to fight, to scream, to tear Savannah's fake sympathetic smile right off her face. But then I looked at Carter. He was watching me with laser focus, his eyes completely devoid of warmth or empathy. He was waiting for it. He was practically begging for it. He wanted me to scream. He wanted me to clutch my baby and throw a hysterical sobbing fit. If I reacted with the entirely justified terror ripping through me, Carter would immediately dial my parents, or worse, emergency medical services. He would tell them I was paranoid, delusional, and completely unfit to care for my own child. It would be the final, irrefutable incident they needed to drag me into a psychiatric ward and strip away my basic rights. They had laid a perfect, devastating trap. If I fought, I proved their point. If I surrendered, I handed my child to a monster. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I forced my breathing to slow, channeling every ounce of self-control I possessed to keep my face completely blank. "You know what you are, right?" I whispered, letting my shoulders slump in profound defeat. "I am really tired. I could use the rest." Savannah's eyes gleamed with triumphant malice as she held her arms out. I will take him to the park, maybe get some ice cream, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. You just go to sleep, Riley. Do not worry about a single thing. We have got everything completely under control. Moving as if submerged in deep water, I slowly transferred Leo into Savannah's waiting arms. My hands shook not from their toxic drugs, but from pure suppressed rage. Leo let out a soft murmur of confusion, reaching his little hands back toward me, but Savannah adjusted him expertly on her hip, bouncing him lightly to distract his attention. Carter smiled a genuine, terrifying smile of total victory and kissed my forehead. Good girl, he murmured. I will pack his diaper bag and walk her out. Just go to bed. I turned and walked into the master bedroom, closing the heavy door behind me. I listened intently as their footsteps faded down the staircase, followed by the low murmur of their voices in the kitchen, and finally the heavy thud of the front door closing. The silence that followed was agonizing. I sank onto the edge of the mattress, digging my fingernails into my thighs until they nearly broke the skin. The physical pain was absolutely nothing compared to the psychological torture of knowing Savannah had my son. I stared at the digital clock on the nightstand, watching the red numbers change. Every single minute felt like a grueling eternity. My mind conjured horrifying, vivid scenarios. What if she carelessly left him near a busy street? What if she intentionally neglected him just to prove I was failing as a mother? I paced the entire length of the bedroom, my heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. I grabbed my phone and opened the secure link Deshawn had sent. The screen displayed a blank, untraceable chat interface. I typed a single desperate message. They took Leo for the afternoon. Savannah has him. I am trapped in the house. The response came less than 30 seconds later. Deep breaths, Riley. They need Leo healthy to maintain the illusion of a happy family managing a sick mother. They will not hurt him. Carter's credit card just flagged a purchase at the upscale gelateria near the city park. Savannah is doing exactly what she said she would, playing the devoted aunt in public. Hold your position, do not give them a reaction. Deshawn's cold, logical assessment was the absolute lifeline I needed. He was right. Savannah and Carter were entirely motivated by greed and public optics. Harming Leo did not serve their endgame. It would invite genuine police scrutiny, which was the last thing Carter wanted while executing massive financial fraud. They needed me to look like the danger, not them. I forced myself to sit cross-legged on the floor, focusing entirely on the slow rhythm of my breathing. I had to endure this. I had to sit in this quiet, empty room and absorb the crushing anxiety without breaking. I could not give them a single thread of instability to pull on. I spent the next 3 hours mentally mapping out my counteroffensive, fueled by the agonizing weight. I reviewed the corporate structures, the hidden accounts, the exact timeline of Carter's lies. When the front door finally opened 3 hours later, and the sound of Leo's happy babbling filled the foyer, I did not rush downstairs. I waited. I washed my face with cold water, smoothed my hair, and walked down the steps with slow, measured movements. I took my son back into my arms, thanking Savannah with a hollow, medicated smile, knowing that every agonizing second of this endurance test was forging the ultimate weapon I would use to destroy them all. The very next morning, the doorbell rang. I braced myself, expecting Savannah to return for round 2, but it was just a local courier holding a brown cardboard shipping box. The return address listed a generic office supply company, but the tracking number scrawled on the side matched a format Deshawn had mentioned during our brief, frantic kitchen exchange. I signed for the box, waited for the courier's truck to disappear around the bend, and carried the package straight into the downstairs powder room, locking the door. I sliced the packing tape with my thumbnail. Beneath a layer of bubble wrap and a decoy stack of printer paper sat a cheap matte black prepaid cellular phone. I powered it on. The screen glowed to life, displaying a single unread text message. It contained a set of GPS coordinates and a time for tomorrow 11 in the morning. A second message followed immediately. It instructed me to leave my primary smartphone at home turned on and connected to the residential Wi-Fi to ensure Carter's tracking software registered me as safely confined to the house. The designated location was an obscure, dilapidated diner situated just off a rural highway 40 miles outside the city limits. It was a rusted, forgotten relic of a building surrounded by cracked asphalt and overgrown weeds. It was the exact type of establishment Carter and his country club peers would aggressively avoid. I parked my SUV in the blind spot behind a massive commercial dumpster, carrying Leo against my chest in his ergonomic carrier. Deshawn was already seated in the furthest corner booth facing the entrance. The diner was completely empty, save for a bored waitress wiping down the counter. Deshawn wore a dark hoodie and a grim, hardened expression. He did not offer a greeting as I slid into the cracked vinyl booth across from him. He simply reached into his leather messenger bag and pulled out a thick manila folder, sliding it silently across the scratched Formica table. "I bypassed the company firewalls last night," Deshawn said, his voice a low, mechanical rumble. "Your agency accounts are locked down tight. If Carter tries to move a single cent, the system will instantly reroute the transaction into a holding ledger and trigger a fraud alert. Your business is safe. But that is the only good news I have for you today." I opened the folder. The first page was a dense spreadsheet covered in red highlighted columns and highlighted transaction histories. I dug into his personal finances. Deshawn continued, leaning in close. "Carter is not just living beyond his means, Riley. He is completely hopelessly underwater. He owes money everywhere. Credit cards, personal loans, shadow accounts. But that is the minor stuff. I traced a series of recurring escalating wire transfers moving from his secondary checking account into offshore holding companies. He is severely entangled with an illegal sports betting syndicate. He has been gambling heavily for over 3 years, chasing massive losses. The total debt is currently sitting right around $300,000. My stomach plummeted. $300,000. The sheer magnitude of the number echoed in my head. It explained the frantic desperation. It explained why Carter could not simply wait for a divorce settlement. He was in deep with dangerous, violent people who did not accept apologies or payment plans. He needed a massive influx of untraceable liquid cash, and he needed it immediately. But it gets worse. Deshawn stated, his dark eyes locking onto mine with terrifying intensity. Turn to the third page. My hands shook violently as I flipped the thick parchment over. It was a dense, multi-page legal contract from a major national insurance conglomerate. The heavy legal jargon blurred before my eyes, but the bold numbers at the top of the policy declaration page were unmistakable. It was a life insurance policy. "Carter and your mother took this out exactly 4 weeks ago," Deshawn explained, his voice stripped of any emotion. "They bypassed the standard medical exam by paying a massive premium multiplier, citing your recent pregnancy and supposed postpartum struggles as the reason for expedited no-questions-asked coverage. Your mother is listed as the secondary beneficiary. Carter is the primary. The payout is $2 million. The diner suddenly felt entirely devoid of oxygen. The walls seemed to close in around the booth. I stared at the names printed on the dotted lines. Carter Blackwood, Barbara Hayes, my husband, my own mother. The horrific, calculated reality of their endgame hit me with the force of a freight train. The puzzle pieces violently slammed into place, creating a picture of such absolute depraved evil that it defied comprehension. They were not just trying to steal my UX design agency. The gaslighting, the stolen spare keys, the hidden television remotes, the missing yellow baby blanket. The meticulously documented complaints to my father about my failing memory. The black market central nervous system depressants slipped into my morning coffee to induce lethargy and confusion. The emergency freeze on my bank account, citing a severe mental health crisis. None of it was meant to merely justify an involuntary psychiatric hold. A psychiatric hold was just the necessary preamble. It was the prologue to their true objective. They were establishing an irrefutable, deeply documented paper trail of a tragic, rapid mental decline. They were actively constructing the narrative of a hysterical, deeply unstable mother buckling under the severe weight of postpartum psychosis. They were laying the absolute perfect groundwork for a staged suicide. They intended to kill me. They were going to murder me in my own home, arrange the scene to look like a desperate tragic end to a well-documented mental breakdown, and then they were going to collect $2 million in tax-free insurance money. Carter would pay off his illegal syndicate debts, my mother would get her cut. For playing the grieving, supportive grandparent, Savannah would get her sister out of the way, and Carter would retain full control of my agency and my son. I felt a cold primal terror wash over me, settling deep into my bones. I looked down at Leo, who was sleeping peacefully against my chest, completely oblivious to the sheer monstrousness of the people who shared our blood. My mother had literally signed a document, placing a $2 million bounty on my head. "We need to go to the police," Deshawn urged, breaking the heavy silence. "I have the financial documents. You have the toxicology report. We can walk into a precinct right now and end this." "No," I replied, my voice shockingly calm. The terror was still there, but it was rapidly being consumed by a blinding, white-hot fury. "If we go to the police now, Carter will hire top-tier defense attorneys. My mother will cry and claim she bought the policy out of genuine concern for my declining health. Carter will claim he froze the accounts to save me from myself. They will spin the narrative post-bail and spend years fighting me in court while they drain my resources. They will try to take custody of Leo. I will not allow them the dignity of a legal defense. I will not give them a chance to fight back." Deshawn stared at me, recognizing the absolute deadly resolve in my eyes. "What do you want to do?" "They built a trap for a crazy woman," I said carefully, sliding the insurance documents back into the manila folder. "I am going to show them exactly how crazy I can be. I am going to let them think their plan is working flawlessly. And then, I am going to burn their entire world to the ground." Deshawn leaned back against the cracked vinyl of the booth, exhaling a long, slow breath. He did not argue. He did not offer empty platitudes about letting the justice system handle it. He simply nodded, his mind already shifting into the tactical, methodical gear that made him a nightmare for corporate embezzlers. "If we are going to do this," Deshawn stated, his voice dropping an octave, "we need absolute precision. The margin for error is exactly 0. You understand that, Riley? If you walk out of this diner and just drive away with Leo right now, Carter wins." "I know," I said, tracing the edge of the manila folder with my index finger. "If I run, he dials emergency services within the hour. He gives them the fabricated psychiatric file he has been compiling. He tells the dispatcher his severely depressed paranoid wife is experiencing a postpartum psychotic break and has abducted his son." "Exactly," Deshawn agreed grimly. "An Amber Alert gets issued across 3 states. The police treat you as a hostile kidnapper. Best case scenario, you are arrested at gunpoint, thrown into a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric hold, and Carter is granted emergency full custody of Leo. Worst case scenario, things escalate during the traffic stop. Either way, you lose your child and they control the entire narrative. Running was suicide. Survival required staying inside the cage. So we dismantle the cage from the inside out," I said, looking down at my sleeping son. "I need you to build a financial fortress around my agency. I do not just want Carter blocked from the funds. I want him caught in the act of trying to steal them." A cold, predatory smile touched the corners of Deshawn's mouth. "I am already 2 steps ahead of you. Blocking him is easy, but it alerts him that we are onto his game. Instead, I am going to build a digital sandbox, a mirrored ghost version of your company back-end infrastructure." I leaned forward, listening intently. "I am going to clone the interface of your primary holding accounts," Deshawn explained rapidly, his hands sketching invisible diagrams on the table. "When Carter inevitably logs in, using the credentials he stole from your laptop, he will see what looks like your actual millions sitting right there. He will initiate the wire transfer to pay off his syndicate debt. The system will accept the command, generate a confirmation number, and tell him the funds are pending. But they will not move," I stated. "Not a single dime," Deshawn confirmed. "The sandbox will instantly trap his IP address, log his device, MAC address, and record the exact routing numbers of the offshore accounts he is trying to feed. The moment he hits submit, a self-executing smart contract will trigger. It will permanently revoke his power of attorney access, lock down every legitimate asset you own, and automatically forward a complete encrypted dossier of his attempted wire fraud to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI, and the State Banking Authority. He will be stepping on a digital landmine, I murmured, a genuine spark of adrenaline cutting through the exhaustion. He will be handing the federal government a signed confession of massive corporate theft, Deshawn corrected. By the time he realizes the money never hit his shadow accounts, the federal warrants will already be in motion. I will have him legally and financially paralyzed. But Riley, none of this financial maneuvering means anything if you are dead. The reality of his words chilled the air between us. The life insurance policy sitting on the table was a loaded gun pointed directly at my chest. They are accelerating the timeline. I said, my mind racing through the logistics of the next 48 hours. Carter's debts are calling. My mother is getting impatient. They think I am properly sedated and losing my grip on reality. I have to go back to that house and give them the exact performance they are expecting. How do you survive the poison? Deshawn demanded, his protective instincts flaring. If they decide tonight is the night they stage the suicide, they are going to force a lethal dose of whatever central nervous system depressant they have been slipping you. I stopped drinking the coffee, I said flatly. I stop eating anything Carter prepares. I will fake the symptoms. I have spent the last 2 months experiencing the actual effects of those drugs. I know the lethargy, the slurred speech, the lack of coordination. I can mimic it perfectly. If he hands me pills, I palm them. If he brings me a drink, I dump it into the soil of the potted plants or down the bathroom sink when he turns his back. You have to catch them explicitly discussing the murder, Deshawn said, reaching into his messenger bag again. He pulled out a tiny matte black device, no larger than a standard USB thumb drive. Audio is good, but video is undeniable. This is a micro-lens recording device. It streams directly to a secure cloud server I control. It does not store data locally. If Carter finds it and smashes it, the footage is already safe. I took the small device, turning it over in my palm. Where do I put it? Somewhere he feels completely in control, Deshawn advised. Somewhere they think they have absolute privacy to discuss their endgame. The master bathroom, I decided instantly. Carter and my mother always retreat to the adjoining master bath to whisper when they think I am unconscious in the bed. They turn the exhaust fan on to muffle their voices. Mount it behind the vanity mirror or inside the air vent, Deshawn instructed. The battery lasts for 72 hours of continuous recording. Riley, you have to push them into making their final move while that camera is rolling. You have to give them the perfect opportunity to strike. I will. I promised, my voice hardening into steel. I will become the perfect victim. I will let them back me into the corner. I will let them pull the trigger. Deshawn reached across the table, gripping my hand with grounding force. We have the counter strategy. I have the financial back end. You have the survival protocol. Use the burner phone only when you are in absolute isolation. We communicate in code. If you text the word storm, it means they are making their move and I am calling the police immediately. Do you understand? I understand. I replied carefully, tucking the micro camera and the burner phone deep into the lining of Leo's diaper bag. I slid out of the booth, adjusting my sleeping son against my chest. The terrified, bewildered woman who had stumbled through the last 2 months was completely gone. I was walking back into a house shared with my executioners, but I was no longer the prey. I was the architect of their destruction. I gave Deshawn one final resolute nod and walked out of the diner, ready to step back onto the stage. I pulled into the driveway, the engine of the SUV cutting out with a heavy metallic finality. I carried Leo inside, moving with the slow, sluggish steps of the heavily medicated woman I was expected to be. The house was deceptively quiet, the afternoon sunlight filtering innocently through the hallway windows. I bypassed the main living areas entirely and headed straight upstairs, my heart hammering a steady, frantic rhythm against my ribs. I needed to establish my surveillance network immediately before anyone noticed I had returned. Leaving Leo safely secured in his nursery crib with a teething toy, I slipped silently into the master bathroom. I flipped the switch for the exhaust fan to muffle any residual noise, pulled the tiny micro camera from the depths of the diaper bag, and reached up to the ventilation grate positioned directly above the dual vanity. The magnetic backing of the device caught the metal grating with a satisfying quiet click. I adjusted the angle blindly, ensuring the wide lens was positioned to capture the entire expanse of the bathroom. The trap was officially set. I smoothed my hair, forcing my hands to tremble slightly as I practiced my vacant, exhausted stare in the vanity mirror. I let my posture droop, becoming the perfect picture of a crumbling, unstable wife. Then I walked out to the landing and began my descent. I only made it halfway down the main wooden staircase before I saw them. They were waiting in the formal living room, arranged in a semicircle like a corporate firing squad. Carter stood by the stone fireplace, his arms crossed over his chest, wearing a deeply manufactured expression of profound sorrow. My mother Barbara sat rigidly on the pristine white sofa, her expensive designer purse clutched in her lap, her posture impeccably straight. Beside her sat my father Thomas, looking stern, grave, and resolutely disappointed. But it was the fourth person in the room who made my blood run cold. A man I did not recognize sat in the leather wingback chair, directly across from the sofa. He wore a sharp charcoal gray suit, holding a thick leather portfolio on his knee. He possessed the cold, clinical detachment of a hired gun. Riley Carter said, his voice dropping into a soothing, patronizing cadence that made my skin physically crawl. "Come sit down, sweetheart. We need to have a serious talk." I gripped the wooden banister, widening my eyes in a display of feigned, frantic panic. "What is going on? Why is everyone waiting for me in here?" "We are here because we love you," Barbara chimed in, her voice dripping with toxic artificial empathy. "You have been deteriorating for weeks, Riley. We have all seen it. The memory lapses, the paranoia, the severe physical exhaustion. You are a danger to yourself, and God forbid to little Leo." Thomas cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as he looked up at me. "It breaks my absolute heart to see you like this, Riley. You have completely lost your grip on reality. Your mother and Carter have been trying to shield me from the worst of it, but Carter finally showed me the evidence today. We cannot let you continue this downward spiral. You need professional intervention." The stranger in the wingback chair stood up, smoothing his silk tie. "Mrs. Blackwood, my name is Dr. Eris. I am a licensed psychiatric evaluator retained by your husband. He reached out to me with profound concerns regarding your erratic behavior, severe mood swings, and signs of potential postpartum psychosis. It was an entirely unethical, paid-for diagnosis, delivered without a single medical examination or prior consultation. They had quite literally bought themselves a doctor to legitimize their narrative." "I am perfectly fine," I stammered, wrapping my arms tightly around my torso and shrinking back against the bottom step of the stairs. "I am just tired. The baby keeps me up all night." "You are all overreacting." Denial is the most common symptom of a severe psychotic break, Dr. Eris stated clinically, pulling a stack of stapled papers from his portfolio and dropping them heavily onto the glass coffee table. "Your family has provided extensive, undeniable documentation of your decline. For your own safety, we have arranged for you to receive immediate residential medical help." Carter stepped forward, picking up the papers. "This is a consent form for a voluntary 90-day residential psychiatric treatment program at a private facility upstate. They specialize in postpartum recovery. You will get the rest you desperately need, Riley." He slid a second, thicker document out from underneath the medical forms. "And this is a durable power of attorney. It temporarily transfers executive control of your UX design agency and all financial accounts to me. It is strictly a protective measure so the business does not collapse while you are hospitalized." I stared at the bold black ink on the power of attorney. This was the endgame staring me right in the face. Carter was going to lock me in a psychiatric ward for 3 months, drain my corporate accounts into his offshore syndicates, to pay his gambling debts, and orchestrate my tragic multi-million-dollar insurance death the moment I was discharged. "I am not signing that," I whispered, injecting a frantic, desperate edge into my voice. "I am not leaving my son. I am not giving you my company." Barbara stood up, stepping around the coffee table until she was mere inches from my face. The mask of the concerned, grieving grandmother evaporated entirely, replaced by the ruthless, calculating predator I now knew her to be. "You will sign those papers right now, Riley. she hissed, her voice a razor-sharp whisper, meant only for me. Because if you refuse this voluntary medical help, Dr. Eris is prepared to testify on the record that you are an immediate threat to a minor. I have Child Protective Services on speed dial. I will tell them you threatened to harm Leo. They will take your baby away tonight, put him straight into the foster system, and you will never, ever see him again. The sheer brutality of the threat hung heavily in the stale air of the living room. I let out a choked, ragged sob, sinking down onto the bottom step. I buried my face in my hands, allowing my shoulders to shake violently. To them, it looked exactly like the complete and total surrender of a broken woman realizing she had absolutely no avenue of escape. Inside, a cold, calculated smile spread across my mind. They had just handed me the physical proof of their coercion. They had brought the fraudulent documents right into my house. Please, I whimpered, looking up with tear-streaked cheeks and a trembling jaw. Please do not take my baby away. Carter knelt beside me, pulling a silver luxury pen from his breast pocket and placing it into my hand. Then do the right thing, sweetheart. Sign the papers. Let me take care of everything. My hand trembled wildly as I took the pen. I pressed the ballpoint to the signature line of the psychiatric hold, scratching my name with erratic, uneven letters. I moved to the power of attorney, signing over my multi-million-dollar agency without a second of hesitation. I handed the clipboard back to Carter, my head bowed in total pathetic submission. I was willingly walking straight into their trap. But as Carter eagerly snatched the documents away, his eyes gleaming with greedy victory, he had absolutely no idea he was stepping directly onto the digital landmine Deshawn had meticulously laid for him. Carter snatched the heavy clipboard from my trembling fingers, his chest puffing out as he rapidly reviewed the messy, tear-stained signatures. Dr. Eris nodded approvingly, packing away his duplicate copies, with the sterile, practiced efficiency of a man who executed these hostile medical takeovers for a living. I remained on the bottom step of the staircase, my face buried deep in my hands, my shoulders heaving with loud, exaggerated sobs. The performance required absolute, unwavering commitment. I let out a ragged, pitiful wail, projecting the exact sound of a woman completely broken by her own mind, crushed under the weight of a fabricated postpartum psychosis. Behind the shield of my palms, however, my eyes were bone dry. The power of attorneys Carter was practically salivating over was nothing more than expensive scrap paper. What Carter and my mother completely failed to realize was that 48 hours ago, acting on rapid-fire instructions from Deshawn and his network of aggressive corporate attorneys, I had secretly dismantled the original operating structure of my UX design agency. In a marathon overnight session of digital paperwork and expedited state filings, we had executed a complex corporate restructuring. I legally transferred every single intellectual property right, every active client contract, and every liquid asset into a newly minted Delaware holding company operating under a completely obscured corporate veil. The specific LLC listed on Carter's freshly signed document, the company he thought he had just successfully hijacked was now an empty, hollow shell. It held zero capital and possessed no operational authority. He had just acquired supreme executive control over a ghost ship. If he attempted to leverage that specific power of attorney at any financial institution, he would find accounts that had been legally zeroed out and shuttered. Heavy tires crunched against the gravel of our driveway, breaking my internal calculations. The dull, mechanical hum of a large diesel engine idled just outside the front door. Barbara moved swiftly to the window, pulling back the sheer curtain with a deeply satisfied smile. "The medical transport is here," she announced, her voice dripping with artificial saccharine relief. "Thank goodness. We are getting you the help you desperately need, Riley. Everything is going to be all right now. You just focus on resting your mind." Two large individuals in muted gray uniforms stepped into the foyer. They carried themselves with the gentle but firm authority of psychiatric transport orderlies. They brought a collapsible wheelchair, though I was perfectly capable of walking. It was all part of the premium service Carter had paid for the complete physical infantilization of his wife to reinforce the narrative of my total collapse. This was the hardest part, the one piece of the performance that required absolutely no acting, only sheer agonizing endurance. Carter walked over, holding Leo awkwardly against his chest. My beautiful, innocent son blinked at me, his tiny brow furrowed at the sudden influx of strangers and the thick tension in the room. I stood up on intentionally unsteady legs. I needed to say goodbye. I needed my son to know I was coming back, even if I was willingly walking into a cage. I reached out my hands, shaking genuinely, as the adrenaline spiked in my veins. Carter stiffened instantly, pulling Leo back half an inch, a silent, cruel assertion of his new absolute power. Please, Carter. I let out a desperate, breathy plea, looking up at him through a fresh wave of manufactured tears. Please, just let me kiss him goodbye. Carter sighed, playing the magnanimous, long-suffering husband for the benefit of the orderlies. He leaned in, turning Leo slightly toward me. I leaned forward, pressing my lips to Leo's soft, warm cheek. I inhaled the sweet, powdery scent of his skin, searing the memory into my brain to fuel my survival for the next 90 days. My heart screamed at me to grab him and run to fight my way out the front door, but I forced my arms to remain loosely at my sides. I love you, I whispered directly into his ear, my voice so low only he could hear it. Mommy is going to fix everything. Be a brave boy. I pulled away, letting my head drop in profound submission. Carter immediately stepped back, placing a possessive hand over the back of Leo's head. He looked down at me with an expression of supreme condescending pity, masking the greedy anticipation burning in his eyes. We will be right here waiting for you when you are better, he lied smoothly, his voice echoing in the quiet foyer. Do not worry about the agency. Do not worry about the finances. I have it all completely handled. You just focus on getting your sanity back. The orderlies moved in, flanking me on either side. One of them gently placed a hand on my elbow, guiding me into the waiting wheelchair. I slumped down into the synthetic leather seat, letting my chin fall forward against my chest. I stared at the polished hardwood floor, projecting absolute catatonic defeat. Thomas stepped forward, adjusting his glasses, looking entirely relieved that the messy business was finally concluding. Barbara placed a cold, manicured hand on my shoulder, giving it a firm squeeze. You are doing the right thing, sweetheart, she murmured. They wheeled me toward the front door. The bright afternoon sunlight stung my eyes as we rolled out onto the porch. The transport van was a sterile white vehicle with tinted reinforced windows. It looked exactly like what it was, a mobile cell designed to keep unstable patients safely contained. I did not fight as the orderlies assisted me out of the chair and guided me up the metal ramp into the back of the van. I moved with the docility of a heavily sedated victim, following their gentle commands without a single word of protest. They strapped me into the secure transport seat, snapping the heavy nylon buckles over my chest and lap. Before the orderly pulled the sliding door shut, I stole one final glance back at the house. Carter, Barbara, and Thomas stood shoulder to shoulder on the front porch. Carter was adjusting his grip on Leo, smiling a tight, triumphant smile. Barbara had her hand resting comfortably on Thomas's arm, the picture of a relieved, loving family who had just successfully managed a tragic crisis. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully discarded me, secured my fortune, and paved the way for their $2 million insurance payout. The heavy sliding door slammed shut with a metallic thud, plunging the back of the van into dim, climate-controlled silence. The engine revved, and the vehicle began to roll down the driveway, carrying me away from my home, my son, and the life I had built. I let my head fall back against the headrest. The manufactured tears finally stopped. The performance was over. I was voluntarily entering a locked psychiatric ward surrounded by people who thought I was dangerously insane, leaving my child in the hands of monsters. But as the van turned onto the main highway, a cold, ruthless calm washed over my entire body. I had handed them a useless piece of paper. Deshawn was already unleashing the digital trap. The timer had officially started. The 2-hour drive to the Silver Pines Recovery Center passed in a monotonous blur of highway markers and dense, towering evergreens. The facility was located deep in the heavily wooded mountains, upstate, geographically isolated, to offer discretion for the wealthy families who preferred to sweep their inconvenient relatives under an expensive rug. The journey upstate took exactly 94 minutes. I counted every single mile marker that flashed past the tinted reinforced windows of the transport van. The vehicle's suspension absorbed the bumps of the rural highway, the rhythmic thrumming of the tires serving as a metronome for the adrenaline pulsing through my veins. The landscape shifted from manicured suburban neighborhoods to dense overgrown pine forests, isolating me further from the city limits. Eventually, the van slowed, turning off the main road and passing beneath a massive wrought iron archway. The private psychiatric facility was designed to look like a high-end wellness retreat, complete with sprawling green lawns and a serene sweeping driveway, but the reinforced glass and security checkpoints betrayed its true purpose. The van eased to a halt in an enclosed sally port at the rear of the main building. The heavy garage doors rolled shut behind us, sealing us inside. The orderlies opened the sliding door, their expressions a mix of professional detachment and mild pity. They unbuckled my restraints and gently guided me down the metal ramp. I kept my chin tucked, maintaining the shuffling, lethargic gait of a heavily sedated patient. They led me through a set of double security doors, swiping key cards and nodding to the guards, until we reached a stark, brightly lit intake room. A triage nurse and an admitting physician waited behind a heavy laminate desk. The doctor, a weary-looking man with a clipboard resting in the crook of his arm, offered a sympathetic smile as the orderlies guided me to a plastic chair bolted to the floor. The taller orderly handed over a sealed manila envelope containing my fabricated medical records and the voluntary admission consent form I had signed just 2 hours ago. With their job complete, the orderlies nodded to the medical staff, stepped back out into the corridor, and the heavy electronic doors clicked shut, locking from the outside. I sat completely motionless for exactly 10 seconds, listening to the hum of the ventilation system, ensuring the orderlies were entirely out of earshot. Then I rolled my shoulders back. I lifted my head, my previously vacant gaze snapping into sharp, absolute focus. I squared my posture, planting both feet firmly on the linoleum floor. The doctor frowned, taken aback by the sudden radical shift in my body language. "Mrs. Blackwood," he began, his tone slow and patronizing. "I am Dr. Evans. I know you are feeling overwhelmed right now, but you are in a safe place. We are going to get you settled into a room and start your evaluation." "I am not checking in, Dr. Evans," I stated. My voice was crisp, resonant, and entirely devoid of the manufactured hysteria I had displayed in my living room. "I am invoking an immediate administrative discharge." The triage nurse paused mid-keystroke, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. The doctor blinked, looking down at his clipboard and back up at me as if trying to reconcile the meticulously documented psychotic woman in his file with the razor-sharp executive sitting in front of him. "Mrs. Blackwood, you were transported here under the recommendation of a licensed psychiatrist," he countered, his brow furrowing. "Your husband signed the intake request, and you signed the voluntary admission forms. It is highly advised that you stay for a standard 72-hour observation period." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on my knees, projecting total authority. "The key word in your sentence is voluntary, doctor. I signed a voluntary admission form under severe duress in the presence of an unethical hired evaluator who has never once treated me." According to state health statutes regarding voluntary psychiatric commitments, a patient retains the absolute legal right to revoke their consent and demand immediate discharge at any time prior to formal processing and psychiatric evaluation. I have not been processed. I have not been evaluated. I am formally revoking my consent right now. Print the discharge against medical advice paperwork immediately. The silence in the intake room was deafening. The doctor stared at me, realizing he was entirely outmatched. He was not dealing with a hysterical postpartum mother. He was dealing with a woman who had meticulously calculated her legal exit. With a heavy, defeated sigh, he turned to the nurse and gave a short nod. She rapidly typed on her keyboard, the printer whirring to life a moment later. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. I reviewed the standard release form, signed it with a steady, decisive hand, and pushed it back. "You are free to go, Mrs. Blackwood," he said grimly, "though I must advise you that we will have to notify your husband that you have left the premises." Notify him in 20 minutes, I replied, standing up and smoothing the wrinkles from my clothes. That is standard administrative processing time. I turned and walked to the side exit door located just off the intake bay. I pushed the heavy metal bar, stepping out into the crisp, biting air of the late afternoon. The transition from the sterile fluorescent lighting to the natural daylight felt like crossing a threshold into a completely different reality. I was entirely off the grid. Carter firmly believed I was locked away, stripped of my communication devices and sedated. He had no idea I was already a ghost. A sleek black unmarked SUV was idling near the edge of the staff parking lot, partially concealed behind a row of tall cedar trees. The passenger door swung open before I even reached it. Deshaun sat behind the steering wheel, his eyes scanning the perimeter with tactical vigilance. I climbed into the passenger seat, pulling the heavy door shut. "Are you clear?" Deshaun asked, throwing the vehicle into drive. "I am clear," I confirmed, watching the psychiatric facility shrink in the side mirror as we sped toward the service exit. I invoked a voluntary discharge. They will call Carter shortly, but by the time he figures out what happened, the trail will be completely cold. Deshaun navigated the SUV through the winding backroads, actively avoiding major highways and toll booths that utilized automated license plate readers. We drove for nearly 2 hours, plunging deeper into a sparsely populated, heavily wooded region. We were systematically erasing my digital and physical footprint. "We are heading to a secure location I prepared yesterday," Deshaun explained, his eyes fixed on the darkening road. "It is a remote off-grid property owned by a former client through a blind trust. No Wi-Fi, no smart devices, no digital footprint whatsoever. It is completely untraceable. Carter could hire every private investigator in the state, and they would never find a single breadcrumb leading to this location." The vehicle eventually turned down a long, unpaved gravel driveway obscured by a dense canopy of ancient oak trees. The safe house was a sturdy, unassuming cabin set far back from the road, surrounded by heavy timber and absolute silence. Deshaun parked the SUV inside a detached enclosed garage, ensuring the vehicle was entirely hidden from aerial view or passing traffic. We walked into the cabin. The interior was Spartan, but highly functional, featuring heavy blackout curtains drawn tightly over the windows and a large analog whiteboard erected in the center of the living room. Several encrypted offline laptops were stacked on the dining table, alongside a radio frequency scanner and a pile of prepaid untraceable burner phones. This was no longer a retreat, it was a war room. I dropped my jacket onto the nearest chair, staring at the blank whiteboard. The cage was broken. Now it was time to hunt. 50 miles away, the morning sun poured through the sheer curtains of the master bedroom. Carter Blackwood stood before the full-length mirror, adjusting the Windsor knot of his crimson silk tie. He smiled, a genuine, gleaming expression of absolute victory. The heavy weight that had been crushing his chest for months was finally gone. He walked over to the mahogany nightstand and picked up the folded legal document. Riley's messy, tear-stained signature sat on the bottom line. It was his golden ticket. He slipped the power of attorney into his leather briefcase, savoring the crisp sound of the brass clasps snapping shut. He checked his phone. A text message from an encrypted number glared at him from the lock screen. It was a single question mark. His creditors. The violent, unforgiving men who ran the offshore sports betting syndicate were losing patience. Carter typed a rapid reply. "Funds securing today. Full transfer by noon." He hit send and pocketed the device, his confidence entirely restored. He was no longer a desperate man drowning in shadow debt. He was the sole executive controller of a multi-million-dollar tech agency. Carter strode through the grand foyer, ignoring the lingering scent of Barbara's expensive perfume from the night before, and exited the house. He climbed into his pristine luxury sedan, the engine roaring to life, and pointed the car toward the city's financial district. The downtown branch of the commercial bank was an imposing structure of steel and reinforced glass, designed to project wealth and impenetrable security. Carter bypassed the line of regular patrons and marched directly toward the frosted glass doors of the corporate account management suites. He did not wait for the receptionist to announce him. He pushed the door open and took a seat in the plush leather chair opposite the desk of Marcus Sterling, the Senior Vice President of Corporate Accounts. Sterling looked up, startled by the abrupt intrusion. "Mr. Blackwood, we do not have an appointment scheduled for this morning." "We do not need an appointment," Marcus Carter stated smoothly, dropping his leather briefcase onto the polished desk. He popped the brass clasps and slid the power of attorney across the smooth wood. "My wife Riley has unfortunately suffered a severe medical setback. She was voluntarily admitted to a residential psychiatric facility yesterday afternoon for long-term care. As a result, she has granted me immediate durable power of attorney over all her personal and corporate assets. I am now the acting executive director of her UX design agency." Sterling picked up the document, his professional demeanor masking any personal reaction. "I am very sorry to hear about your wife's health, Mr. Blackwood. Give me a moment to review this and update the system parameters." "Take your time," Carter said, leaning back and crossing his legs. "But I need to initiate an expedited wire transfer this morning. $500,000 routed to this specific international holding account." He handed over a small folded index card containing the syndicate's routing numbers. "Treat it as a priority 1 corporate expense." Sterling adjusted his glasses, scanning the signature on the power of attorney. He turned to his dual monitors, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The rhythmic clacking filled the quiet office. Carter watched the banker, his heart beating a steady, triumphant rhythm. In less than 10 minutes, his massive, suffocating debt would vanish. He would be entirely free, holding the keys to Riley's fortune while she rotted in a padded room upstate. Suddenly, the clacking of the keyboard stopped. Sterling frowned, leaning closer to the screen. He clicked his mouse twice, navigated to a different window, and typed a new sequence of commands. A sharp, negative chime echoed from the computer speakers. "Is there a problem?" Carter asked, a faint edge of impatience creeping into his voice. "Just push the authorization through, Marcus. I have a very tight schedule today." Sterling did not look up. He picked up the desktop telephone, dialed a short internal extension, and waited. "Yes, this is Sterling Incorporate. I need a secondary verification on the Blackwood agency holding accounts." He paused, listening intently to the voice on the other end. A deep furrow formed between his brows. "Yes, I see the timestamp." "Understood." He placed the receiver back on the cradle and turned his attention back to Carter. "Mr. Blackwood, I cannot process this wire transfer. In fact, I cannot process any transaction on this account." Carter uncrossed his legs, planting his feet firmly on the carpet. "Do not be ridiculous. You are holding a legally binding notarized power of attorney. I have absolute executive control. Process the wire." "The document you handed me is entirely invalid," Sterling stated, his voice dropping into a cold, clinical register. "The corporate entity listed on this power of attorney no longer possesses any capital, nor does it hold any active operational authority." Carter felt a cold sweat break out across the back of his neck. "What are you talking about? I know exactly what is in those accounts. There is over $4 million in liquid capital sitting in that corporate ledger." There was Sterling corrected, gently sliding the power of attorney back across the desk. "Up until 48 hours ago. According to our updated filings, the limited liability company was subjected to a comprehensive structural reorganization. Every liquid asset, every active client contract, and all intellectual property rights were legally transferred to a newly established holding company in Delaware. The entity you are attempting to take control of is an empty shell. It holds a balance of exactly $0. "That is impossible!" Carter snapped, his voice rising in panic. He leaned over the desk, his carefully manicured facade cracking. "Riley has been incapacitated. She has been deteriorating for weeks. She does not have the capacity to orchestrate a corporate restructuring. I am her husband. I demand access to the new holding company." Sterling shook his head, his expression hardening. "You do not have authorization. The new operating agreement explicitly names a controlling partner who holds sole executive veto power and exclusive financial authorization." "Who?" Carter demanded, his hands gripping the edge of the mahogany desk. "Who is the controlling partner?" "A Mr. Deshaun Miller," Sterling answered, reading directly from the monitor. "And Mr. Miller has instituted a total financial lockout on all linked infrastructure. The system actually flagged your login credentials as compromised the moment you presented this power of attorney. I am currently locked out of viewing anything beyond the public registry, and an automated fraud alert has just been generated and sent to our legal compliance division. The air vanished from the room. Carter stared at the banker, his vision blurring at the edges. Deshaun Miller. The name echoed in his skull like a death knell. Riley had not lost her mind. She had not been buckling under the weight of the sedatives. She had been playing them. The entire breakdown, the tearful signature, the desperate goodbye to Leo, it was all a meticulously choreographed performance. She had let him walk straight into a bank with a useless piece of paper while her hidden partner locked the vault from the inside. Mr. Blackwood Sterling said, his tone now carrying a distinct warning. I am going to have to ask you to leave the premises. Our security protocols require us to confiscate any credentials associated with a flagged fraud alert. Carter did not argue. He could not speak. The crushing weight of the syndicate debt slammed back down onto his chest 10 times heavier than before. He grabbed his empty briefcase, his hands shaking violently, and stumbled out of the executive suite. As he burst through the front doors of the bank and out into the glaring city sunlight, his phone vibrated in his pocket. It was the encrypted number again. He was out of money, out of time, and completely outsmarted. The encrypted messaging app flashed a bright, angry red across Carter's phone screen. He tapped the notification with a thumb that refused to stop shaking. The message was brief, completely devoid of punctuation, and utterly terrifying. Collection team deployed. You have until midnight. Carter felt the heavy, humid city air suddenly turn to ice in his lungs. His tailored charcoal suit suddenly felt like a straitjacket. He stumbled toward his luxury sedan, his hands fumbling blindly for the door handle. He threw himself into the driver's seat and slammed the lock button, his chest heaving as if he had just sprinted 10 miles. The offshore syndicate did not issue empty threats or negotiate extensions. When the collection team was deployed, it meant they were coming to break bones, seize assets, and inflict maximum physical damage until the ledger was balanced. He needed cash. He needed a massive, untraceable wire transfer, and he needed it before the sun went down. The corporate lockout Deshaun Miller had engineered was a brilliant, devastating blow, but Carter refused to believe it was an impenetrable wall. Riley was still the primary. She could override the system. She could execute a direct transfer if properly motivated. Carter connected his phone to the car's Bluetooth interface and frantically barked a voice command. The dial tone echoed through the premium sound system as he called the Silver Pines Recovery Center. He drummed his fingers aggressively against the steering wheel, his mind calculating a new, desperate strategy. He would order the facility staff to put Riley on the phone. He would threaten to transfer her to a state-run maximum security ward if she did not verbally authorize a release of funds to his accounts immediately. Silver Pines Intake. How may I direct your call? A receptionist answered, her voice serene and maddeningly slow. This is Carter Blackwood. He snapped, his voice sharp with manufactured authority. Connect me to Dr. Evans right now. This is a severe legal emergency regarding my wife, Riley Blackwood. Hold, please, the receptionist murmured. Elevator music filled the car cabin. Carter gritted his teeth, checking the dashboard clock. Every passing second pushed him closer to the syndicate's midnight deadline. Finally, the hold music clicked off. Mr. Blackwood, this is Dr. Evans. The psychiatrist's tone was entirely devoid of the patronizing warmth he had displayed in the living room yesterday. It was rigid, defensive, and deeply annoyed. Put my wife on the phone, Carter demanded, dropping all pretenses of the grieving, supportive husband. I am her legal guardian under her current medical incapacity. You will bring a portable phone to her room, and you will do it this minute. I cannot do that, Mr. Blackwood, Dr. Evans replied flatly. Are you refusing a direct order from her medical proxy? Carter shouted, spittle flying against his steering wheel. I will have your medical license revoked. I am not refusing anything, the doctor shot back, his voice rising to match Carter's hostility. I cannot put her on the phone because she is not here. Your wife is no longer a patient at this facility. Carter froze. The blood drained entirely from his face. What are you talking about? I admitted her yesterday afternoon. I watched your orderlies load her into the transport van. She arrived exactly as scheduled, Dr. Evans stated coldly. And the absolute second she stepped into the intake bay, she invoked her legal right to a voluntary administrative discharge. She signed the release forms against medical advice and walked out the side exit. We attempted to contact you immediately, but the primary phone number you provided on the intake forms routed directly to a disconnected line. Mrs. Blackwood has been gone for nearly 24 hours. She was picked up in a private vehicle and left the premises. Do not contact this facility again. The line went dead. Carter stared at the digital dashboard display, his mouth hanging open in absolute, unadulterated shock. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. She had faked it, every single tear, every tremble of her hand, the desperate, pathetic kiss goodbye to their son. It was an Oscar-worthy performance designed specifically to placate him while she slipped right through his fingers. She had a getaway car waiting at the psychiatric ward. She had a financial watchdog locking down her accounts. She was completely gone, and she had taken his only lifeline with her. A feral, guttural scream ripped from Carter's throat. He slammed his fists against the steering wheel over and over until his knuckles bruised. Extreme, blinding rage rapidly morphed into pure survival panic. The syndicate was coming. He needed leverage. He needed the one thing Riley loved more than her own life. If he held the boy, Riley would have no choice but to surrender. She would drain the hidden Delaware holding company dry to ensure her son's safety. Carter shoved the car into drive and stomped on the accelerator. The heavy sedan lunged forward, tires squealing against the hot asphalt. He drove with reckless, terrifying speed, treating traffic laws as mere suggestions. He swerved violently between lanes, running a red light, and narrowly avoiding a collision with a commercial delivery truck. He did not care. Nothing mattered except getting his hands on Leo. He tore into his upscale suburban neighborhood, pushing the car to its limits. He swung hard into his own driveway, the tires jumping the curb and tearing deep, muddy trenches into the meticulously manicured front lawn. He did not bother turning off the engine. He kicked his door open and sprinted up the front steps, fumbling with his keys, before finally shoving the heavy oak door open. "Barbara," he screamed, his voice echoing violently through the grand foyer. "Thomas, get down here right now!" Silence answered him. The house was completely, utterly dead. Carter sprinted up the main staircase, taking the steps two at a time. He burst down the hallway and threw open the nursery door, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and frantic. The nursery was pristine. The afternoon sunlight cast a warm glow over the expensive wooden crib. But the crib was entirely empty. The mobile hung motionless. He spun around. The changing table was cleared of all supplies. The diaper bag was missing. The shelf holding Leo's favorite plush toys was completely bare. His eyes darted back to the crib. Resting perfectly in the dead center of the bare mattress was a thick, cream-colored envelope. Carter lunged forward, snatching the envelope with trembling fingers. He ripped it open, tearing the paper in half. A single sheet of heavy cardstock slid out. He recognized the elegant, looping handwriting immediately. It did not belong to Riley. It belonged to his own sister, Monica. Carter's eyes scanned the brief, devastating message. "Carter." The note read, "I know everything. I know about the syndicate debts. I know about the fraudulent life insurance policy. I know what you and Barbara tried to do to Riley. I have seen the financial dossiers and I have heard the recordings. You disgust me. Deshawn and I have taken Leo on a weekend aunt and uncle trip. We are at a secure, undisclosed location. The authorities have already been notified of your activities. Do not try to find us." Carter let the cardstock slip from his fingers. It fluttered to the nursery floor, landing softly against the hardwood. His knees gave out and he collapsed onto the carpet. His own blood had betrayed him. His sister had sided with his wife. He sat in the empty nursery, the syndicate's midnight deadline ticking closer with every breath. He had no money. He had no wife. He had no child. The house of cards had completely, finally crumbled to dust. 50 miles away from the shattered ruins of Carter Blackwood's life, The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria hummed with the manicured, frantic energy of an ultra-exclusive rehearsal dinner preparation. The ceiling dripped with cascading Swarovski crystals, casting fragmented rainbows across the imported Italian marble floor. A small army of event coordinators scurried between tables, meticulously adjusting centerpieces composed of rare white orchids flown in explicitly for the occasion. Savannah stood at the epicenter of the organized chaos, a flute of vintage Dom Perignon resting loosely in her perfectly manicured hand. She wore a tailored ivory silk dress that hugged her frame, projecting the exact image of old money royalty she was desperate to marry into. She took a slow, deeply satisfied sip of the champagne, her eyes sweeping across the opulent room. Everything was flawless. Everything was exactly as she demanded. The Sinclair wedding was destined to be featured in every major society magazine on the eastern seaboard, and she was going to be the flawless shining star at the center of it all. Barbara and Thomas strolled through the gilded double doors, moving with the languid, untouchable grace of people who had just successfully executed the financial heist of the decade. Thomas wore a custom tuxedo, his hands tucked confidently into his pockets, his chest puffed out with unearned pride. Barbara glided beside him in a sweeping emerald gown, a diamond necklace resting heavy against her collarbone. They approached their youngest daughter, their faces glowing with a sickeningly triumphant radiance. "It is absolute perfection, darling," Barbara declared, waving a hand toward the massive, intricately carved ice sculpture being erected near the main bar. The lighting, the florals, the imported linens. It is exactly the caliber of event the Sinclair family expects. "You have completely outdone yourself, Savannah." Savannah offered a cool, practiced smile, adjusting a loose orchid on the nearest table. "Of course it is perfect, Mother. Julian's parents are bringing half the board of directors from their hedge fund tonight. There is no margin for error. We are cementing our place in the upper echelon of this city. Speaking of which, where is Carter? I expected him to be here by now to drop off the additional deposit for the caviar bar and the strings arrangement." Thomas chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound of absolute contentment. "Give your brother-in-law a moment, Savannah. He had a very important errand to run at the corporate bank this morning. Securing the agency funds requires a bit of tedious paperwork, even with the durable power of attorney we forced your sister to sign. He will arrive shortly with a very large, very heavy checkbook to cover the rest of these exorbitant expenses." A tall, strikingly handsome man stepped out from the VIP lounge, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke Tom Ford suit. Julian Sinclair, heir to a massive real estate empire, wrapped an arm around Savannah's waist and kissed her cheek. He exuded the casual, arrogant confidence of a man who had never been told no in his entire life, completely insulated by generation wealth. "What are we discussing?" Julian asked, flashing a brilliant, expensive smile at his future in-laws. "Please tell me we are not still debating the seating chart." "I explicitly told my mother she cannot move the British ambassador to table 4. We were just discussing my sister Savannah," lied smoothly, leaning her head against his shoulder. A vicious, mocking spark ignited in her eyes. "I am just so heartbroken she cannot be here to celebrate with us tonight. She would have loved the ice sculpture." Julian rolled his eyes, letting out a sharp, derisive scoff. "Right. The tragic breakdown. It is truly a shame she lost her mind right before the wedding of the year. I still cannot believe she just snapped like that. Who leaves their own multi-million-dollar tech company and their infant child to check into a lunatic asylum?" "She has always been incredibly fragile, Julian," Barbara interjected, pressing a hand to her chest in a theatrical display of maternal sorrow. Riley simply could not handle the pressure of her career and motherhood, her mind completely fractured under the weight of it all. "It is a tragedy, but we had to do what was best for her and for the family legacy. We had to intervene before she did something incredibly dangerous to herself or the baby." Savannah let out a high musical laugh entirely devoid of empathy. She took another sip of champagne. "Dangerous is an understatement. The woman was hallucinating in her own living room. Carter told me she was practically catatonic when the medical transport arrived to haul her away. It is honestly for the best." She is locked away in a padded cell where she cannot embarrass us in front of your parents, and Carter is finally stepping up to manage that tech agency the way a man should. Thomas nodded approvingly, clapping Julian on the shoulder. It is all about preserving the assets, my boy. Riley built a strong foundation, but she lacked the executive ruthlessness to take that company public. Carter has the vision and the drive. With Riley safely tucked away for a mandatory 90-day psychiatric evaluation, we have absolute control over the transition. The Blackwood and Sinclair families are going to completely dominate this city's financial sector. We are untouchable. Julian smirked, raising his own glass in a mock salute. To the new dynasty, then, and to keeping the crazy relatives locked in the basement where they belong. They clinked their crystal flutes together, the sharp ringing sound cutting through the ambient noise of the ballroom. They stood in a tight, impenetrable circle of greed and arrogance, reveling in their perceived victory. They were completely blinded by their own hubris. They believed Riley was heavily sedated in a sterile, locked room, weeping over her lost child and her stolen fortune. They believed Carter was currently transferring millions of dollars into their shared accounts, paving the way for a luxurious, consequence-free future. They felt supremely secure, convinced they had committed the perfect crime. They had no idea that the power of attorney was currently sitting on a bank manager's desk, completely worthless. They had no idea that their entire financial safety net had been legally vaporized by a ghost company in Delaware. Most importantly, they had no idea that Riley was not in a hospital bed, but currently sitting in a heavily fortified war room, surrounded by encrypted servers, tracking their every move with ruthless precision. The rehearsal dinner was meant to be the ultimate celebration of their flawless deception. Instead, it was simply the beautifully decorated staging ground for their imminent destruction. The evening progressed into a glittering display of unimaginable excess. Hundreds of crystal glasses clinked in harmonious celebration beneath the vaulted ceiling of the Waldorf Astoria ballroom. A string quartet played a delicate, lively waltz from a raised velvet dais, perfectly masking the hushed elite conversations of the Sinclair family's hedge fund colleagues and the city's high society. Waiters in pristine white jackets circulated with silver trays of vintage champagne and rare caviar hors d'oeuvres. It was a masterpiece of manufactured perfection, a physical manifestation of the wealth and power Savannah had ruthlessly secured. At the head table, Carter Blackwood sat completely rigid, his custom charcoal suit feeling more like a suffocating straitjacket. He clutched his crystal water goblet with a grip so tight his knuckles were bone white. Sweat beaded heavily at his temples and rolled down the back of his neck, soaking the collar of his expensive dress shirt. He was trapped in a blinding nightmare of his own making, forced to smile and play the role of the tragic, supportive brother-in-law while his entire world burned to ash. His phone felt like a live grenade in his breast pocket. Midnight was approaching. The offshore syndicate was actively hunting him. He had no money, no leverage, and no child to use as a bargaining shield. Every time the heavy mahogany doors to the kitchen swung open, Carter flinched violently, fully expecting the ruthless debt collectors to march in and drag him out by his throat. Barbara patted his arm blindly, mistaking his sheer terror for profound grief. She leaned in to whisper conspiratorial words of encouragement about his impending financial reign. He swallowed hard, nodding mutely, severe nausea churning in his stomach. Thomas stood from his seat, tapping a silver spoon against his champagne flute. The sharp, clear, ringing sound instantly commanded the attention of the sprawling room. The string quartet faded into a respectful silence. The low murmur of wealthy guests ceased, all eyes turning toward the patriarch of the evening. Thomas buttoned his tuxedo jacket, exuding the smug, impenetrable confidence of a man who believed he had successfully outsmarted the universe. Family, friends, and esteemed guests. Thomas began, his voice booming across the ballroom with theatrical warmth. Tonight we gather to celebrate a union of two extraordinary families. We celebrate Julian and Savannah. He raised his glass toward the smiling couple. Savannah sat radiating artificial grace, her hand resting delicately over Julian's. Thomas continued, his chest puffing out further. My youngest daughter has always been the shining beacon of perfection in our household. She embodies the grace, the intelligence, and the unwavering poise that this family stands for. Watching her step into this beautiful new chapter brings an indescribable, profound joy to my heart. Thomas allowed a solemn, calculated shadow to cross his features. He lowered his glass, slightly shifting his tone to one of practiced melancholic gravity. As many of you know, this celebration is unfortunately tinged with a heavy sorrow. My eldest daughter, Riley, cannot be with us tonight. She has recently fallen ill, succumbing to a severe mental health crisis that required immediate long-term psychiatric intervention. It breaks our hearts to proceed without her, but we find immense comfort knowing she is safely contained, receiving the intensive medical help she desperately needs. He gestured magnanimously toward Carter. We must also commend Carter, who has shown unimaginable strength today, stepping up to take the reins of her company and manage her complex affairs during this tragic time. A murmur of sympathetic sighs rippled through the audience. Savannah pressed a linen napkin to her dry eyes, feigning a delicate sisterly heartbreak for the benefit of the Sinclair board members. Carter stared blindly at his porcelain plate, a fresh bead of sweat sliding down his nose, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Julian's parents nodded in solemn approval of Thomas's dignified handling of the family embarrassment. Thomas raised his glass high into the air once more, preparing to deliver the triumphant conclusion of his toast. Before another word could leave his mouth, the towering heavy oak double doors at the rear of the ballroom slammed open with a deafening, thunderous crash. The sound echoed like a physical strike. The heavy brass handles hit the marble walls, shivering the nearest crystal sconces. Every single head in the sprawling room snapped toward the entrance. Thomas froze, his champagne flute hovering uselessly in midair. Savannah dropped her napkin, her jaw going entirely slack. Carter lurched backward in his chair, a strangled gasp escaping his throat, fully expecting the syndicate's enforcers to flood the room with weapons drawn. But it was not a violent debt collector stepping into the golden light of the ballroom. It was Riley. She did not shuffle in wearing institutional hospital scrubs. She did not look fragile, sedated, confused, or broken. She strode through the doorway, radiating absolute terrifying power. She wore an immaculate razor-sharp midnight blue designer suit that cut a striking silhouette against the opulent backdrop. Her posture was flawless, her shoulders squared, her chin held high, and her eyes burning with a cold, calculating fury. The catatonic weeping victim Carter had discarded at the psychiatric facility was entirely gone. In her place stood an apex predator who had just locked the doors to the slaughterhouse. She was not alone. Flanking her right shoulder was Deshawn, his imposing frame dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, holding a thick, securely bound leather portfolio. His gaze locked onto Carter with the lethal intensity of a trained sniper. Flanking her left were two stern, broad-shouldered individuals wearing dark, unassuming suits, their gold badges visibly clipped to their belts. They moved with the synchronized, undeniable authority of federal investigators. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, heavy, and completely suffocating. The high society guests stared in bewildered shock as the supposedly insane, incapacitated sister marched straight down the center aisle. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the Italian marble, a steady, terrifying countdown echoing through the vast space. Barbara let out a sharp, breathless gasp, her hand flying to her throat as if all the oxygen had just been sucked from the room. Thomas slowly lowered his arm, his smug confidence rapidly draining away, replaced by a pale, creeping dread. Savannah gripped the edge of the head table, her knuckles turning white, her carefully constructed high society facade shattering into a million irreparable pieces as Julian stared at her in utter confusion. Carter could not breathe, his lungs burned. He stared at his wife, the woman he thought he had completely outsmarted, the woman he thought he had legally erased from existence. Riley stopped exactly 10 feet from the head table. She did not look at the stunned guests or the bewildered Sinclair family. Her cold, unyielding gaze swept over Savannah, dismissed Barbara, cut through Thomas, and finally landed squarely on Carter. The execution had begun. The heavy silence stretched suffocating and absolute. No one dared to breathe. The Waldorf Astoria Ballroom moments ago, a pinnacle of elite celebration, had instantly transformed into a gilded courtroom. Riley did not blink. She did not scream. She possessed a terrifying preternatural calm that radiated absolute authority. Every step she took forward was measured, the sharp clicking of her heels slicing through the dead air like a metronome ticking down to a detonation. Carter remained paralyzed in his chair, his suit suddenly soaked in cold terror. His mind misfired desperately, trying to comprehend the sheer impossibility standing before him. She was supposed to be sedated. She was supposed to be locked away in a secure ward. Yet here she was, her eyes entirely devoid of the fog of medication, burning instead with the lethal clarity of a woman who held every single one of his sins in the palm of her hand. Savannah's mouth opened, a pathetic, high-pitched gasp escaping her throat, but she found absolutely no words. Beside her, Julian Sinclair looked from his trembling fiancée to the fierce woman approaching the head table, his aristocratic features twisting in genuine confusion. Thomas lowered his hand slowly, the crystal champagne flute slipping from his numb fingers and shattering violently against the marble floor. The sharp crack made Barbara flinch, her hands flying to cover her mouth as the blood drained from her face. Riley bypassed her parents entirely. She ignored Carter's wide, terrified eyes. She walked with unwavering purpose straight toward the ornate wooden podium where Thomas had just delivered his pompous congratulatory toast. The microphone stood waiting. Beside it rested the digital interface for the venue's premium sound system. Moving with deliberate, practiced precision, Riley withdrew a sleek smartphone from her tailored jacket pocket. She picked up the auxiliary cable resting on the console, the exact cable used earlier to test the acoustic balance of the room, and plugged it firmly into her device. She did not address the sprawling room of high society guests. She did not offer a tearful speech or a dramatic monologue. She simply raised her chin-locked eyes with her trembling sister and pressed play. The premium surround sound speakers, designed to amplify symphonies to absolute perfection, crackled to life. The audio was pristine, digitally enhanced by Deshawn's security team to eliminate any background interference. The recording echoed with devastating clarity across the imported floral centerpieces and the horrified faces of the Sinclair hedge fund executives. It must look completely natural. Barbara's recorded voice cut through the room, sharp and impatient. The dosage needs to be exact, Carter. We cannot risk the medical examiner finding anything suspicious during the autopsy. If we lose that life insurance payout, we lose everything. A collective, horrified gasp ripped through the ballroom. Dozens of elite guests recoiled in their seats. Julian Sinclair stiffened his head, snapping toward Savannah with wide, disbelieving eyes. Then came Carter's recorded voice, whining, desperate and undeniable. I have the synthesized compound. Savannah mixed it into her morning tea yesterday. She is already exhibiting the cognitive delays. We just need to increase the drops tomorrow. Once she is incapacitated, the legal proxy transfers to me. I can authorize the life insurance fraud and drain the corporate accounts before the agency even realizes she is gone. Savannah's own voice echoed next, laced with a sickening, malicious giggle that made the guests physically shudder. It is almost too easy. She is so utterly convinced she is having a breakdown. A few more days of this toxin, and she will happily commit herself. Then I get my dream wedding. You pay off your pathetic gambling debts, and we never have to deal with her insufferable superiority again. The recording clicked off, leaving a silence far heavier and more destructive than before. The damage was instantaneous and total. The Sinclair board of directors stared at the head table with expressions of absolute revulsion. The society reporters, who had been discreetly sipping champagne near the bar, were suddenly furiously typing on their phones, recognizing the scandal of the decade unfolding in real time. Savannah lunged forward, her hands waving frantically in the air, her face pale and contorted with sheer panic. Julian, wait. That is fabricated. It is a deep fake. She is insane, Julian. You know she is insane. Riley stepped away from the podium. Her expression remained completely devoid of emotion as she approached Julian Sinclair. She did not speak a single word to Savannah. She reached into her tailored jacket and withdrew a thick, sealed medical envelope bearing the official crest of the state's top toxicology laboratory. With a fluid, graceful motion, Riley handed the document directly to the horrified fiancé. Julian tore the envelope open with shaking hands. His eyes rapidly scanned the crisp official lines of text, the blood panels, the chemical breakdown, the undeniable legally certified proof of heavy metal poisoning matching the exact compounds discussed in the audio recording. The signature of the chief toxicologist verified the horrific truth of the attempted murder. While Julian read the damning medical file, Deshawn moved with swift military efficiency. He bypassed Thomas, who was sputtering incoherent, breathless denials, and marched directly to Carter. Carter shrank back into his chair, raising his hands as if to ward off a physical blow. Deshawn did not strike him. Instead, he slammed a massive heavy file directly onto the pristine white tablecloth, right over Carter's expensive china plate. The folder burst open upon impact. Hundreds of pages spilled out, revealing wire transfer receipts, offshore account numbers, and the undeniable documentation of Carter's massive illegal syndicate debts. The financial ruin he had tried to cover up with blood was now laid bare for the entire financial elite of the city to witness. Julian Sinclair slowly lowered the toxicology report. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving behind a mask of cold, aristocratic fury. He looked at Savannah, the woman he had intended to marry, and recoiled as if he were staring at a venomous serpent. "Julian, please." Savannah begged, hot tears streaming down her face, reaching out to grasp his tuxedo jacket. "I can explain. It was Carter's idea. We were just trying to protect the family assets." "Do not touch me," Julian hissed, his voice vibrating with absolute disgust. He violently yanked his arm away, taking a large step back to put physical distance between them. "You are a monster, all of you. You tried to murder your own sister for a payout." He threw the toxicology report onto the table, the papers scattering over the spilled champagne. "The wedding is off. The merger is dead. If any of you ever contact me or my family again, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your miserable lives in a federal prison cell." Julian turned sharply on his heel. He signaled his parents, who were already standing, their faces pale with shock and outrage. The entire Sinclair contingent, including the powerful hedge fund directors and elite socialites, moved as a single unified wave toward the exits. They abandoned their drinks, leaving their expensive meals entirely untouched. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with the Blackwood family. The mass exodus was swift, brutal, and punishing. Savannah let out a ragged, hysterical wail, collapsing to her knees in the middle of the ballroom, as she watched her billionaire fiancé, her elevated status, and her entire meticulously crafted future walk out the door forever. The grand double doors swung shut behind the Sinclairs with a heavy final thud. Riley stood amidst the smoldering wreckage of her family's social and financial empire, her posture straight, her gaze completely unwavering. She had delivered the ultimate devastating payoff. The federal agents did not waste a single second admiring the devastating theatricality of Julian Sinclair's abrupt departure. They moved with absolute synchronized precision, executing their orders with cold mechanical efficiency. The taller of the two agents stepped swiftly around the scattered debris of the broken champagne flute and grabbed Carter by the shoulder. Carter let out a pathetic, high-pitched yelp, trying to scramble backward, but his expensive dress shoes found no traction on the polished Italian marble. The agent wrenched Carter's arms behind his back with practiced, unyielding force. The sharp, unmistakable click of heavy steel handcuffs locking into place echoed violently across the suddenly cavernous ballroom. "Carter Blackwood, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted poisoning, and first-degree wire fraud." The agent stated, his voice a flat, booming baritone that left absolutely no room for negotiation. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Carter did not invoke his right to remain silent. He immediately began to sob, his knees giving out entirely. The two agents had to physically haul him upright, dragging him by his armpits as he blubbered incoherent excuses, begging for a lawyer, begging for Riley to call them off. He was a hollow, pathetic shell of the man who had confidently orchestrated her demise just days prior. He thrashed weakly, his custom charcoal suit wrinkling, as the reality of a federal prison sentence crashed down upon him. Thomas and Barbara stood frozen in absolute, unadulterated horror at the head table. The social annihilation they had spent decades terrified of was unfolding right in front of them, rapid, total, and completely inescapable. The remaining event staff, the elite catering managers, and the few high society journalists who had lingered specifically to witness the carnage were staring at them with undisguised revulsion. Smartphones were out recording every humiliating second. Cameras were flashing from the shadows. The Blackwood name, which Thomas had ruthlessly protected and polished, was currently being incinerated in the public eye. They were no longer the untouchable elite of the city. They were a cautionary tale, a disgraced venomous unit of criminals who had tried to slaughter their own blood for a financial payout. Thomas staggered backward, his hand clutching his chest as if he were experiencing a physical cardiac event. The pompous, overbearing patriarch was gone, replaced by a trembling, terrified old man staring into the abyss of his own destroyed legacy. He looked at Riley, opening his mouth to issue a command to demand she stop this madness, but the cold, dead fury in her eyes silenced him instantly. He had absolutely no power here. The empire he thought he controlled was nothing but a fragile illusion, and Riley had just shattered the glass. Barbara, however, completely lost her grip on reality. As the federal agents dragged the weeping, stumbling Carter past the head table toward the grand exit, her meticulously maintained manicured facade completely fractured. She lunged forward, her emerald gown catching on a fallen chair, tearing the expensive fabric with a loud, ugly ripping sound. "What are you doing?" Barbara screamed hysterically, her voice cracking as she clawed desperately at the empty air between them. Her face was red, contorted in a mask of sheer, unhinged disbelief, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "Stop them right now, Riley. Tell them to stop. Call them off. We are your family." Riley did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She did not show a single ounce of sympathy or hesitation. She simply turned her head and looked her mother dead in the eye. The silence that followed Barbara's hysterical outburst was deafening. Riley allowed a chilling, victorious smile to slowly spread across her face. It was a smile devoid of any warmth, reflecting only the absolute triumph of a survivor who had finally dismantled her abusers piece by piece. "No," Riley replied, her tone dropping the temperature of the room by 10 degrees, cutting through her mother's delusion with surgical precision. "You are accomplices." Barbara recoiled as if she had been struck with a physical blow, stumbling back into Thomas, her hands covering her face as she finally broke down into loud, ugly sobs. Riley turned away from them, her posture immaculate, adjusting the cuffs of her designer suit. She glanced down at Savannah, who was still kneeling on the marble floor, ruined, weeping into her hands, entirely broken by the loss of her billionaire fiancé and her elevated social status. The youngest Blackwood daughter looked up, her eyes wide with terror, waiting for the final strike. Riley took one step toward the exit, then paused, looking back over her shoulder. She delivered her final devastating blow with casual, effortless grace, ensuring the humiliation was absolute. "By the way, enjoy dessert," Riley stated, her voice projecting clearly across the ruined ballroom. "I just paid the venue's exorbitant catering bill using Savannah's stolen credit card. The fraud alerts should start hitting your phone in exactly 3 minutes. Have a wonderful evening." Savannah's head snapped up, a fresh wave of absolute horror washing over her tear-streaked face. She scrambled frantically for her designer clutch, her hands shaking so violently she could barely open the clasp. She yanked her phone out, staring at the screen as the notifications began to cascade, confirming her utter financial ruin. Riley did not wait to watch the final meltdown. She turned her back on the smoking crater of the Blackwood family and walked straight toward the gilded double doors. Deshaun fell into step right beside her, an approving, tight-lipped smirk resting on his face as they bypassed the stunned onlookers. The heavy oak doors swung open for them, and they stepped out of the stifling, oppressive atmosphere of the Waldorf Astoria and into the cool, crisp evening air of the city. Riley took a deep, grounding breath, filling her lungs with the absolute certainty of her freedom. The toxic, suffocating chains that had bound her to her family for her entire life were finally permanently severed. There was no more fear, no more manipulation, no more constantly looking over her shoulder. The nightmare was completely extinguished. A sleek, black armored SUV waited idling at the curb. Deshaun opened the rear door for her, his demeanor shifting from imposing bodyguard to trusted ally. Riley slid into the luxurious leather interior, a genuine radiant warmth finally replacing the cold fury in her chest. She gave a single sharp nod to the driver behind the partition. "Take me to my son," she ordered, her voice trembling slightly with pure, unadulterated joy. The heavy vehicle merged seamlessly into the bustling city traffic, leaving the disgraced, shattered remnants of her abusers far behind. She leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes, her mind completely focused on the only thing that truly mattered. She had secured her empire. She had exacted her brutal, flawless justice, and now the war was over. She was going home to Leo, and for the first time in her life, she was entirely beautifully free. The gripping saga of Riley and her treacherous family serves as a powerful reminder that blood does not guarantee loyalty. True strength lies in recognizing toxic environments and having the courage to establish impenetrable boundaries. Riley's journey demonstrates that we are not obligated to accept abuse or manipulation simply because it comes from relatives. By choosing self-preservation over a destructive family dynamic, she reclaimed her narrative and secured her future. We must learn to value ourselves enough to walk away from those who diminish our worth. Please take back your own power, share your experiences of survival, and comment below.